You wouldn't do good on Jeopardy, Rich. You'd have to figure that out.
I'd be like, or maybe it's like an L with a bar or something.
Yeah.
Wait, we have Google.
He's gonna, yeah, there's gonna be a couple of pieces of information underneath. But
You want to wait for that until
Integrated mic.
50 is L.
Or are they still figuring it out over there?
This is the most important thing.
And I think if you put the lower numbers in front of the bigger ones, it takes away from them, doesn't it? Right. I remember that from like third grade.
So it would be CDXX.
All right, everyone ready? You're 5 minutes late. 5. Be 8 minutes late. For Sam's time.
Okay.
All right, then we will come to order without objection. I'll take the meeting. If anyone has public comment. Mr. Margaret. Dr. Margaret,
Mr. Chairman, I think the Libertarian National Committee should express its appreciation and thanks to the Libertarian Party of Louisiana for an extremely nice event last night.
yes.
Absolutely.
I just want to say that our former state chair in Florida, Carl Dickey, has written a novel, his first novel, and he's working on his second, and you can get this from Amazon. It's called Liri, L-I-R-I. I guess that's how you pronounce it.
Mr. Mason.
I'd like to thank the members of the LNC for your generosity, for your fellowship last night. I think it was a great event. You guys helped make it so, and thank you.
And thank you for that wonderful lunch yesterday. It's so nice not to have pizza.
Well, that was Robert.
I think we paid for that.
So, Ms. Madison.
That was not public comments, so too much. No one wants to speak, so radio public comments, they should get. Okay. So I'd like to make a motion to add on to the agenda.
Pardon me, Ms. Madison.
Thank you.
I need a shot collar and he needs to have the controls. Okay, so I want to make a motion to add on to the agenda, and I presume that we would probably place it at the end of new business without previous notice. We postponed the electronic meeting rules there, so we could add this new item after that, but before discussing the next meeting location. And this would deal with an item that I discovered while assembling convention archive materials that I believe the board needs to be aware of.
Are we asking for open session or executive?
You're aware of the topic, so.
I haven't considered open session.
Sure. Okay.
Do you want to, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
It's what I think would be a violation of convention policies that we set that might be.
Is there objection to having this item for agenda call for 15 minutes?
Not objection. And pardon me, Madam Secretary, where are you placing this again?
Okay, at the end of the section of new business without previous notice, we have, we've already postponed 15 minutes worth of electronic meeting rules. So after the electronic meeting rules, then this item, and then discuss the next meeting location. So right there will be electronic rules and meeting location.
Okay.
Is there any objection?
For how long? How long? 15.
Hearing no objection for that to be done in 15 minutes. Second motion is
My second motion is, there's a matter that we didn't have all the information for in executive session yesterday, and it occurred to me that I could find hints of those details in the audited financials have some footnotes that have some disclosures, and those told me enough information to realize that Mr. Stark had answered those questions, and it told me enough that there's a timeliness matter that I think the LNC needs to be aware of. So I would like to ask for, I think the information to be relayed to us in about 5 minutes. My guess is that it's going to trigger a few questions, so I'd like to give a little buffer time for questions, but I think we need an executive session just so the LNC is aware of timeliness issues regarding something discussed in executive session. And since we're on budget right now, if we want to do it now, I do not see this taking, spreading out to be a 30-minute session. Minimum needs to be guessed. So I would ask for a 15-minute executive session. We might as well do it now, not right away.
And partly, Ms. Madison, under our policy and restrictions, what heading would this be under for executive session?
It would still be the employee compensation.
And that requires simple majority for entries into executive session, is that correct?
So 15 minutes for executive session right now. Who's going to be discussing?
And if we finish early, that's fine.
Is there objection to that? If I may inquire,
Okay.
will this information, is this information that we need to have to make a decision and take action at this meeting?
Possibly.
Is there objection to going into executive session for 15 minutes? Hearing no objection, we will go into executive session for 15 minutes to deal with this topic.
Les, turn off the webcam.
He has to be repetitive.
Yes, just that.
Is there any objection to that procedure? Hearing no objection to that procedure, then that's what we'll do. Wes, if you just
Hey, can you restate the question? To change the valid access expense line item $50,000 to $57,500.
Mr. Chairman, if we go forward, it might be useful if people are making motions to cite specific lines if possible.
Here we go.
I said as we go forward, Mr. Chairman.
All right.
And keep in mind that we're adopting the front page, so we may look at underlying account numbers on the sub-levels, but for purposes of what I'm going to stick in the minutes as the final budget, I need the top line numbers that are in there.
It's line 70.
Is there any objection to this change?
Objection?
Okay, there has been an objection. Mr. Redpath, would you like to speak on it?
I laid it out in my valid access report, Mr. $57,500 for valid access in 2015.
Mr. Olson, would you like to speak against?
Yes, the budgeted amount includes supporting affiliates that we're not competent. And we're going to use money we extract from affiliates that have been competent. And generally, I think we could use that money in a better regard. When we spend money on ballot access, we get one state gets benefits for one election cycle. And I prefer to use our limited resources in areas where multiple states can benefit over a longer period of time.
We all benefit from ballot access. I benefit from candidates being on the ballot in Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Texas, states with automatic ballot access or currently have ballot access, and those who don't. We all benefit from more libertarian candidates, whether they're in our state or not. Norm, did I hear you use the word incompetent there, though? Did you? I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand. I made your first part. I want to make sure I understand it.
Well, one of the states involved, I don't want to be specific, but they could have put a governor candidate on the ballot and it didn't succeed.
Well, I will also say that states don't choose their own ballot access laws. They are thrust upon them by the state legislature, and there are just states that are in very unfortunate circumstances that are not of their doing in Houston.
Would anybody else like to speak against? Here, is there any further debate at any time on this topic?
I'm sorry, Mr. Redpath, in addition to suggesting the move upward, was there any suggestion as to something that should be moved downward?
No.
Is there, Mr. Weiner?
When would these funds need to be spent, cash flow wise?
I think that, I haven't talked with, let me put it this way, I would think that Arkansas, I would think we would want to do Arkansas before it gets too hot. Yeah, so I would say in the springtime for Arkansas, we can, it's a 90-day window, we can select at any time, but it's a 90-day window, correct, Paul?
I believe they moved it up to be longer than that now. Or, no, you're right.
It's a 90-day window.
It was 6 months at one time, that was 60 days, and then it was 90.
Well, regardless, we have, the important point is, we can do it any time, but we have once we do it, we have a limited day count window.
Yeah.
Okay, that's.
Well, about 90 days is plenty of time, we got done early each
Right,
other.
and I'm not just saying, we can basically do it any time, and it would be, and the sooner the better. Kentucky can't go until November 2015, and I would think South Dakota would be basically a summertime deal.
Dr. Law?
I'm sorry,
Oh,
South
go ahead.
Dakota, when?
Summertime.
Summertime.
Dr. Law?
Actually, I would like to ask a generalization of Mr. Weiner's questions right now. Can you give sort of a ballpark estimate of what the cash flows are like in terms of the money going out the door? First quarter is going to be what, 0? Second quarter, what, 20,000? Ballpark estimate. A rough ballpark estimate.
Sounds like second quarter.
Half of it, 0, 40, 40, 20.
Thanks.
So, is there any other debate on this issue?
I have a question.
Mr. Tomaso?
Just more a general question. These are drives, Mr. Redpath, that, I mean, we're very confident that they'll get done, you know, I mean, we can't say 100%, but they'll get done if we put the money in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Weiner?
And my understanding is that the actual expenditures still have to be approved by the executive committee?
That hasn't been, that would have to be done by motion. So that's not, that is a year-to-year budget thing. So that's not a condition right now in 2015.
Well, then I would like to move to amend the motion that the, let's see, what would be the wording that we've used in the past? Oh, okay, Alicia?
And technically, I don't think it's germane to his amendment of his line number, but once we process his amendment, then I think that would be a separate amendment, but I have the language.
Mr. Goldstein?
Bill for South Dakota, that gets our presidential candidate on the ballot in
It's
16.
2 elections. It's 2016 and 2018.
Okay.
And this time, I'm damn sure they run governor candidate.
You promised that. Can we put that in the budget?
Could we put that in writing with the affiliate?
But it's on camera.
Any other debate or discussion on this amendment? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. This is substantive, so it's roll call?
It's an amendment to a main motion.
Okay, we can do it. Love by show of hands. All those in favor? Those opposed?
The amendment is adopted. We're back to the main motion now.
Alicia?
Right. So I move to amend the budget to add a proviso, which would read as follows. Ballot access expenditures for 2015 shall only be authorized by a 2/3 vote of the executive committee, and the total expended cannot exceed the budgeted amount. That will be a proviso to the budget.
Ms. Madison, would you like to speak to that motion?
Second.
Oh, good call. Now that it's been seconded, would you like to speak to that motion?
All right, we've done this for the past several years. Basically, if we just have a large dollar amount in the budget, it's an authorization to spend, and it's under the discretion of staff. And we have preferred in the past to have the EC to review the proposals and plans for obtaining the ballot access before the money is authorized to be spent. So this is a typical way that we have handled it for the past few years.
Would anybody like to speak against this motion? Dr. Long?
Question, Mr. Redpath, if this motion is adopted, do you think it's going to cause any problems?
generally has not in the past.
What causes you heartburn?
No, I'm used to it.
All right. Is there any further discussion on this topic? Mr. Agee?
Also ask Mr. Redpath, do you see for next year of having like some emergency come up where we have to have a DC meeting in 1 or 2 days in order to meet some emergencies to get authorization?
No, I don't see that in 2015. I don't see that in 2015. You never know, but I don't see that happening in 2015.
Is there any further discussion or debate? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. We can do this by a show of hands. Those in favor? Those opposed? Motion passes. Are there any other amendments? Mr. Goldstein?
I move to change line item 45 on the front page of the budget, compensation, to decrease it by the amount of $35,600.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Gold, is there any objection? Hearing
I'm
none.
sorry, I just want to make sure. Which line again, please?
Line, am I got the right one? 45 on the front page of the budget. Where it says compensation decrease in the blue column, the $511,300 to, I believe, if my math is right, $471,300.
471,300.
If I did the math right, but I am not an accountant.
That's 40 grand.
Well, then I did the math wrong. And I don't have my calculator.
It should be 35,600, so the final line is 475,700.
475,700. I stand corrected.
Same numbers are written on this chart.
Now that everyone's had time to look at this, is there any objection to this motion? Hearing none, the objection carries, the amendment carries without objection. Are there any other amendments to the budget?
Can we, get the combined impact shown on the screen, see where?
Pardon me, what's next?
Oh, I was asking if the treasurer
should we
could get
do-
the combined
take it?
effect of the amendments that have been made, so we can see where we are.
Drum roll, please.
Yeah, but we still need a buffer for next year.
We subtracted 35,600.
Are we gonna spend 30,000?
Should read 475.
For political reasons, if we give up 10,000. You okay with it?
Mr. Wiener?
I'm just gonna
I'd
ask.
like to have a review again of what the affiliate support expenditures on line 56 encompassed. If you could review that for us. 50, I'm sorry, affiliate support 50.
I will say this, the affiliate support committee has had time to do the polling data and gather information. We're still basically reviewing the results. One more deliverable that we owe this committee is to take the #1 needs list from the state chairs and prioritize and give you a prioritized ranking. And from that, we will be proposing in subsequent meetings, proposed projects intended to help specific affiliates. And, we had discussed earlier in our teleconferences, generally a basis of a 30,000 number, and we were basing it on travel expenses. But really, even at the time, I was commenting that conclusion didn't really have substantiation from the raw data. And so what I plan to do in the next couple of months, actually within the next month, is to look through the prioritized list, get committee buy-in, and come back to this committee in the next session with more specific proposals. I believe if y'all leave the 15,000 in the budget, we'll have good use for it, and the details of that will be fleshed out between now and the next meeting. Strictly up to your discretion, the bodies, as to whether you want to leave the 15,000 there. I believe that we will have good use for it, but I'm not prepared to give you a good analysis at this time, just because I haven't had time to do that.
Mr. Olson?
Yeah, I'd just like to point out, the committee didn't get formed until late September. We had 40 days to put what we've got done together, and we're looking forward to continuing that activism.
We did have a meeting this morning at during breakfast, and so we are preparing plans for specific actions. That's all.
The amendments have been made. Sorry for that. Anyone else to recognize us? Visual budget.
I know it's the bottom here.
I'd like a similar review on the IT committee, whether they think that they have adequate details as to what they think their portion will cover, or...
Yeah,
Mine is where that money is.
We're consulting.
yeah, we're trying to find the second line item. Oh, there it is.
There was $10,000, I believe, in the capital expense budget, right?
There's 15.
15 in capital expense. Where was the other 15?
Administrative.
Was it 81, was it 8190? Was that bumped up for us?
Software, hardware, and other.
The footnotes indicating 10,000 of it was for IT related whatever.
So 10,000
Yeah. and then
in
another
8190, then 15,
capital.
so we got 25,000.
Dr. Clark?
Would either Mr. Goldstein or Ms. Matson repeat those numbers again, so
We're still trying to figure them out.
There was, if line 8190 on the big budget has a $10,000 request, and the CapEx was 15 for new purchases, I believe, was what I heard.
do I understand the gentleman correctly, under line 8190, software, hardware, and other IT?
The footnote has the footnote T says an extra $10,000 request per the IT committee. And then we had, I believe the rest of the request was part of the bottom of the budget line, the new cap expenses for, I guess, new software and hardware for the upcoming projects. I believe that's how it's booked.
That 61,597 included the money for the building fund, right?
Yeah, there's.
Or the 75,000 included how much for the building fund?
There's 60,000 in the capital expenses building fund.
And so the other 15 would have been for the IT request.
Correct. So you have 10,000 extra in the expense and 15,000 extra in capital.
I'm going to recognize Mr. Redpath, then Ms. Matson, and Mr. Weiner.
Is there included in the budget, LNC council expense? I know we are not incurring anything right now, but I presume at some point here, we're going to start incurring LNC council expense.
As I recall, we booked 3/4 of it.
Where is it booked?
Because we didn't anticipate filling the position before the first quarter.
And that rolls up into professional services?
It is professional services, 8,200.
It rolls up and down.
Where does it, where does that go then to the top? Yeah, I know this, but where does it come up here?
Number 40.
Number 40, administrative, thank you, Mr. Allen, thank you.
Ms. Matson, then Mr. Weiner, then Mr. Johnson, then Mr. Goldstein.
Okay, I guess I want to comment regarding the way we're budgeting that for the IT committee and the affiliate support committee. I'm kind of wary to budget big round numbers for things that we don't have detailed spending plans for. And I want to point out that we have the option of budgeting a smaller amount for now, and as we get, have the committees come back to us as they get specific spending plans, and then we increase the budget at that time to specifically approve the plans, because at this point, we don't know what we're approving. We're just putting money in the budget, and we don't know what it's going to be used for yet, and I'm kind of inclined to trim them back and come back and revisit. We can amend the budget at any time with a majority vote. We have a special rule for that. It's exempt from the emergency provisions, that kind of thing, so it's pretty easy to amend our budget. If I saw one head kind of nodding in that direction, so I guess before I decide if I want to make a motion, I'd like the two committees to address if they can give us more, you know, maybe. You said you don't have details, but how would we know what the money would be spent on? Would it just be subject to approval of staff? It's going to have to go through a committee? How does that work if we don't know what we're voting on?
Who are you directing the question to?
The two committees, if you like support the two committees.
McClendon first and then let's hear it.
I will say that you do have specifics. They are listed as the, when we contacted the state chairs, we asked them, what is your number one need from LNC? We've got all the data. We've got, you know, basically one item per state. Where we're lacking in details, giving you a prioritized list. In other words, I need to take that list, myself and Vicki will sort the list according to like giving the top 10. And when we come back in the very near future, it will be with a more specific listing of the 50, here's what we want to tackle first. But you do have the raw data in your report.
Mr. Goldsky or Mr. Tomaso?
Well, first of all, in response to Mr. McClendon's statement, if I remember right from the presentation yesterday of the Affiliate Support Committee, at least 2 of those items were IT related.
That's correct.
And so I think that whatever, if you guys have allotted for anything of that in your part of the budget, is a moot point, because it's probably stuff that we're going to take care of anyway. So if your idea of where this budgetary allowance is going to go is into those 2 particular items, then, I mean, it's a recommendation to the IT committee as to what the state chairs want, but I don't think they need to be budgeted on your side of the budget.
I concur with what you're saying, but even in our 30,000, which I never really totally bought on myself, but it passed the committee vote. We never had in mind like double dipping, because we know that your committee has certain scope, and we were not intending to, you know, have our committee do your job.
Okay. You can if you want to. I'll have Rich address Alicia's question.
For the IT committee, yes, it's round numbers, just because it seems stupid to not put a request in. Just to give you, the big things we were talking about were the website redesign and internally upgrades to Razor's Edge, and sorry, it's in the report, but like the website, I mean, if you want to do the website, it's probably a $5,000 to $10,000 RFP. That's to get semi-qualified work, and the Razor's Edge packages, typically the licenses for those are in the thousands. So I imagine, I mean, we have a process we're working on in place to make sure we're getting real bids, real proposals, they get properly reviewed. Obviously, any final expenditure, we would need to prove, I mean, like the website, that's branding, that's our identity, we would put it to the vote. So they're round numbers because that's the best estimate we have. Obviously, if the committee is really concerned, we can talk about, you know, maybe rounding it down a little bit, but I think these are, for the projects we're talking about,
it's not working.
The two projects and probably $5,000 for a smaller project, like perhaps a shared membership database or some new hardware we need in the office, I think are pretty reasonable. You know, out of a $1.23 million budget, $25,000 for new IT is not unreasonable in my opinion.
So I didn't see a lot of hands, so I just want to let everybody who has hands know that they're, so I'm going to go Mr. Weiner, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Goldsmith, Mr. Olson, Mr. Tomaso, and Dr. Moore. So that was the order I've been seeing them as they've come up. So Mr. Weiner.
Okay, first of all, a question for you. The 15,000 in the capital portion, is the website design included in that, or in the?
I think it could go in either category, and Robert apparently may have a more direct answer or opinion at least on that.
Okay, Robert?
Our general rule is anything $1,000 or over is capitalized.
Okay.
So, can I ask, related to this, would licenses for existing software go under CapEx or the IT, the main line item?
Would be under IT expense.
Okay, so I mean, where we're putting these is a little unclear.
Yeah, if it's a one-time like software purchase, then, and if it's over $1,000, that would get capitalized. If it's capitalized, if it's over 1,000. But if it's simply we're grading our software license, which is an annual fee, that is expensed. So like the $12,500 we pay currently to Blackhawk is expensed on a monthly basis.
Okay. So perhaps I misspoke of where the buckets are allocated, but.
My concern is very similar to Alicia's, that when we budget something, that is normally considered an authorization for staff to spend it. And I'm not comfortable putting in placeholder numbers in the budget that say, okay, when we figure out what we want to spend the money on, we're going to go spend it. So either we should do as Alicia suggested and reduce the amount and come back later on if necessary to increase it, or we need to have some kind of proviso that says before the money is spent, it has to get some kind of further approval from the LNC.
Well, here's my answer to that is already.
Mr. Goldstein, you are out of order, sir.
But he asked a question of the IT committee.
No, that was not a question of the IT committee. I'm saying that, the only way, I would support either of those possibilities, but barring that, I'm not willing to support the current amounts that are being proposed for the budget.
Mr. Johnson.
I see at this point in time, we have a surplus of $17,800 and something dollars. I would like to, but I know I'm swimming up the stream here, to increase the frequency of LP news from 4 times a year to 6 times a year, which would be $17,200. But we have all this, everybody else else's money too.
Is that a motion, Mr. Johnson?
Okay, I'll make a motion. It's line 85.
To increase line 85 by, what's the cost of LP News, Robert?
It says 8,200.
82 per issue, so.
8,600.
86 per issue, so 17,200. Is that the request?
That's my motion.
And it's been seconded by Mr. Hagan. Mr. Johnson's made a motion to increase line 85 communications expenses by $17,200 for the purpose of going to continuing 6 issues of LP News. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, well, I think it's important for us to communicate with our members. And this is something that I think they don't hate it the way they hate fundraising letters. Some of them actually like getting it. And it's been pretty good recently. I think the graphics could be greatly improved, but the content is good. And it's a positive thing. And I don't like it being cut back 4 times a year. It should be 6 times a year or 12 times a year. So I know that the executive committee cut it back, so I know that people are against this, but I'm still on this fixation.
Would anyone like to speak against? Ms. Mattson?
Okay, so I'm going to speak against this, not because I don't like giving more LP News. If we were in a better budget scenario, that would be fine and dandy and great, but I realize that we're showing a pretty $17,000 there on the bottom line at the moment, but always in the back of my mind is that Worcester 2016 ballot access, and I think we need to come out of this with some surplus to carry over. I don't think 17,000 enough, so due to those bigger picture concerns, I'm going to have to vote against this one.
Would anyone like to speak for it? Is there anyone who would like to speak for Mr. Johnson's motion? Dr. Martin.
I have a question. Mr. Benedict, Mr. Krause, do you have any reason to believe that by virtue of maintaining 6 issues per year, that the amount of funds coming in, by virtue of the fact that you can include fundraising appeals, but then you can include envelopes, what's the benefit directly in terms of dollars? You have a ballpark estimate of what that would be like?
It certainly does benefit because we enclose fundraising, but sometimes we push it harder than others. Let's just guess half,
Not even.
a third.
Yeah, that would be close.
Now maybe it makes people optimistic, and so we get that money through fundraising letters or something.
follow-up question is, what would be the value of staff time in terms of doing the extra 2 issues? In other words, there's the distribution cost, the printing cost, what's the staff time cost in terms of this ballpark estimate?
It's
Project of this sort.
good. Well, it's mostly a lot of Carla Howell's time. She's the one who does the stuff you like is mostly being done by Carla Howell. So she'll continue to be busy, and it's a lot of work.
Mr. Hayes?
So for these communications, these newsletters, we're using print. We're in the electronic age. Do we really have to continue to do this? Would there be a difference in the effectiveness if we move to electronic means?
We can do electronic in addition to at this point. It is available as PDF on the website. Mr. Cross, do you have an answer?
Yeah, and plus, I mean, we do send out the email saying as soon as it mails, essentially, I think let's post a PDF and sends out an email link, people know. And all our members are made aware that there is the option to not receive the newsletter. So they do have that choice. But again, it's also a fundraising vehicle and an advertising vehicle, party promotion vehicle. So I still think it's worthwhile doing print. But maybe one solution, in my opinion, would be maybe doing 2 electronic only editions and 4 print editions. That would be one suggestion.
Mr. Tomaso, then Mr. Olson, and Mr. McClendon.
I don't want to speak up. Hopefully I'm not breaking anything, but based on our discussions last night, there is a second line item impact from doing 2 additional issues because of the outsourcing.
Yes.
So you would have to account for that in line 45 as well. I love the idea, but we do have to budget for it fully. It's what I forget what the exact figure was per issue, but it was 1,200, 1,500, something like that for the layout and production. I don't think that was included. If I'm, can I ask the?
Did we guesstimate for 6 or for 4 issues? 4.
So that's why I'm saying
so
it would
be
have
an addition. Well, but that's the 8,600. Is that just the cost of production and shipping? That is not the cost of editing, because editing was done by staff. Is that right?
Right. Well, we pay an outside person, for the editing. But you're right. We could add another.
I just wanted to make sure my recollection was 4. Yeah. So if we're going to 6,
right.
There's an additional. Your motion needs another piece.
Mr. Olson, then I believe Mr. Flora hasn't spoken on this issue, and then we'll come. Or sorry, it was Mr. Olson, then Mr. McClendon, then Mr. Flora. Mr. Olson.
Yes, I just prefer to use a portion of the increase and just print an extra 20,000 newsletters and ship 1,000, 2,000, 3, whatever the appropriate number is to each affiliate. And say, you're going to do your next outreach booth, here's some material that you can use. Going to distribute them around the neighborhood or put them in the barber shops or doctor's offices or whatever.
Mr. McClendon, then Mr. Flora, then Mr. Redmond.
Sort of answering Mr. Hayes' question. When I was the county chair in the Houston area, we also had a newsletter that we mail out on a quarterly basis. And pretty much if our members did not get that envelope in that newsletter, we did not get money. And so by simply giving that hard copy envelope, that really does a lot in revenue.
Mr. Flora.
This is both a question and maybe possibly an amendment to your amendment. Do you think we could achieve the same results if we did a 4 print, 2 electronic version? Would that be something that would work?
I would actually be happy if we did 12 issues, 4 of them mailed or something. So any increase is okay with me. I would be amenable to something along what you're talking about, yes.
Would it be in order to make that amendment at this time?
You'd have to, it would be in order, but you'd have to amend to figure out what the number change is going to be. Because if it's not going to be 17.2, you'd be amending his amendment to make the number increase smaller.
Okay. propose the following amendment to change the increase in budget from 17,200 to 3,600, which would be to cover 3 additional online editions and maintain the original 4 print editions.
Second, please.
Mr. Moore has moved an amendment to the original amendment. Dr. Larkin has seconded it.
Clarify the details of that again. It's instead of the $17,200 increase, instead it's a $3,600 increase.
To add 3 electronics.
To add 3 electronic or online or whatever editions and keep 4 current print editions.
Yes, that is the amendment. Do you need to speak to it in any more than you have?
No.
Okay, then is there anyone in opposition to the amendment, seeking to be recognized in opposition? I'll start with Mr. Olson and then kind of go from there.
I'd just like to ask the executive director, how does putting together 3 extra online issues affect your ability to raise other funds?
I probably want to think about it more, but my initial thoughts are these extra issues would probably be a lot shorter and smaller. I just can't see putting all that work into something that's just posted online that not many people are going to look at. But if it's simpler, that may be a good idea. And just one other concept on print versus, if I can. The advantage of print, again, LP News is a lot of work, so I'm not asking for extra issues, but the advantage of print is it is kind of an advertisement to the party that gets in their face, in their mail. It's so a lot of people don't read our emails, they go to a folder, and people say they don't want it, but just like no one wants these grocery store flyers that, Dillard's ads and Macy's ads, you get them anyway, and you ship them, people send them because they want to advertise their stuff. So LP News is kind of that. It's not just news, it's an ad to our members.
Speaking in favor, Dr. Lark, or are you speaking in favor of the amendment?
More general comment, it's in order. I've raised this issue before. I think now is a very good time for us to deal with this. I actually would not be in favor of 6 print issues this year, because I think that we would be better off looking at 2016 as a year for more print issues because of the presidential year. I don't know that we really reviewed what we want LP News to do. There are actually different purposes for LP News. Promotion of our candidates, promotion of people who are activists, it's also a fundraising vehicle. I think as we look forward, it's now the time for us to think through very carefully. As we changed into a digital world, what do we actually want LP News to do? Different organizations and nonprofits have different purposes for their publication. Perhaps this LNC could distinguish itself by thinking through what we really want LP News to do and then making the appropriate changes, particularly in 2016.
Mr. McClendon, then Mr. Goldstein, then Ms. Madsen, then Mr. Weiner.
Yeah, briefly, I'm generally not favorable, although I could still be persuaded. I just see it as spending a lot of labor that is precious and not really getting the financial results we need to live. I just don't, it's like we're spending 1/3 of the money but not getting the 10% of the benefits. So I'm inclined to not support it.
Mr. Goldstein, then Ms. Madsen, Mr. Weiner, Mr. Redpath, and Mr. Hayes.
My opposition or perhaps question is whether this is the proper place to even do this. Because if I understand the additional cost of Mr. Johnson's proposal was in printing and distributing the newsletter, not the production of the newsletter. If we're sending out the electronic versions, we don't have production costs. The $3,600 that Mr. Vora is advocating for would be more properly put into the compensation line item of the budget. Philosophically, as to whether more or less print LP News has nothing to do with this specific amendment. It's where the proper money where the money gets applied properly. So I think it might be out of order anyway.
They will let it stay in order for now, just for simplicity's sake, but I understand your point. Ms. Madsen, then Mr. Weiner, then Mr. Redpath, and Mr. Hayes.
I'll second the comments of Mr. McClendon about the amount of effort versus the likelihood of a fundraising payoff from it. But I also want to ask, since we haven't really done online-only editions of LP News, or we don't have a readership base that's expecting it to be there and for them to go read it online, and so what efforts do we envision would be made to get people to actually read the online editions that are created? Because we mail out the others, so it's sitting there in the mailbox. What would be the plan for getting people to read the online edition?
Can I speak to that question?
Yes.
The way that I would envision it is that there would be, if we're going to do an online only for the first one, we would just do a ton of push both on social media and on the email list. It's just something different to get people excited about it. I mean, even if we did it just one online only thing, you know, it's almost like just a general rule in just anything where you just change something a little bit. It's enough reason to get the people that weren't really paying attention to kind of get excited about something again. And, you know, if we don't do 3, I'd be happy to do 1 as a test, because I think that there's a lot of value to what we can do. Remember, unlike the supermarkets, we have a readership. We have people that come to our Facebook page that read our emails. We have people that are already in advance excited about us. So we can get them much more excited with more internal marketing and internal messaging leading up to it to make it kind of a bigger splash.
So Mr. Weiner, then Mr. Redpath.
Okay, I would be opposed to both the amendment and the original motion. First of all, if we want to do something online, we already do emails to our members. We can always come up within the existing budget and the staff time with some special mailing or project that does not cost a lot because there's no paper costs or anything, to try to be something, you know, like a super email project to our members or whatever. So I don't think we need to budget for something like that, certainly not as an experiment. But I think there's a different value to a paper newsletter, and I think it does have value. However, we have to set priorities in our budget. We have financial problems, and while there are a lot of nice things that we would like to do, we have got to set priorities. And unfortunately, this year at least, I think we have to cut back the newsletter to 4 editions. Maybe next year we can make it 6 editions in an election year. Maybe if our revenue expands greatly, we can increase it later on. But right now, I think we have to keep it at 4, and I think we have to look at other ways of increasing our revenue in preparation for our ballot efforts next year.
Mr. Redpath and Mr. Hayes and Dr. Lark.
I agree with Mr. Weiner. I'm opposed to the amendment. I'm opposed to the motion, even though I'd like to see it happen. It is not the right way to prioritize our resources at this point. And I will vote against both. And I do all reading these questions.
Second.
No, yes, actually, I do want to move all reading these questions. No, just the 2. No, just the amendment and Mr. Johnson's motion. I move that question.
Is there objection to moving to a vote on the question? Hearing no objection, we'll move to a vote on the amendment to the amendment, which would change Mr. Johnson's amendment to say 3,600 instead of 17,200. All in favor of the amendment to the amendment, please.
Wait, could you restate that again?
Yeah, sorry. Mr. Johnson's original amendment was to increase the member communication expense line item by $17,200. Mr. Vora's amendment to the amendment was to change that $17,200 to $3,600 for the purpose of electronic only as opposed to additional print. So we'll move to a vote on the amendment to the amendment. If you're in favor of the amendment to the amendment, please, can we do hands? That's fine. Hands, if no one objects to hands. If you're in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. 2, 3, count. 3, if you're opposed. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11. So with the amendment failing, we'll move to Mr. Johnson's original amendment, which is to increase the line item by $17,200 to support 6 issues of LP News instead of 4 issues of LP News in 2015. All in favor of his amendment, please raise your hand. 3. Opposed? 12. All right. I had an on-deck list for people seeking to be recognized. Prior to going into that amendment, I believe Mr. Goldstein was next.
I just want to address Mr. Wiener's concerns about spending the money and ask you a question. Is you concerned that this money is going to be spent without any further review by anybody?
And without any further authorization by anybody?
Well, I think the biggest item that we're looking at is a new website. And there's a provision in our bylaws already that any contract over $7,000, $7,500, it has to be approved by the chair. So there would be that review, because I guarantee we're not going to get it for less than $7,000, $8,000 a new website. But more importantly,
Go ahead.
Anyway, but more importantly, the IT committee's intention was never to move forward with any project without a total review by the LNC. And if you want to codify that, that's fine, but we would never, $500 of this allotment is for Alicia's software. That's not a big deal to run the meetings. Small things like that are not a big deal, but certainly any substantive change, either the database system or to the website, we would never affect any changes or ask staff to affect any changes without the consent of the body.
We have I'm just going to give you all, it's about a 15-minute warning right now on this agenda item, so be cognizant of that. Mr. Olson, you're next.
Yes, I just want to address Mr. Wiener's concern as well. The budget is a plan, it's a spending plan, and it's, to use your word, it prioritizes, it shows our priorities on spending. It also gives guidance to the different committees. The Ballot Access Committee now has guidance and says, yeah, we're going to be able to do these 3 states this year, and they can proceed accordingly. Even though the executive committee has still got to approve the actual disbursements or encumbrances. And similarly with the affiliate support committee, if I heard this last term, from the chair, well, we didn't have any money, so what good would it do to meet, because we couldn't do anything anyway. So the important thing is to establish a priority and give a plan, and I don't perceive that the affiliate support committee will ever spend a dime without asking for basic approval of a plan from the committee as a whole.
Mr. Tomaso, were you seeking to be recognized? If you're not, I'll move.
I can go to somebody else first.
You'll have to raise your hand.
Okay.
Dr. Lark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually very sympathetic to the point that Ms. Mattson and also Mr. Wiener raised. In this case, I'm actually in favor of keeping the lines for the affiliate support and for what's there for IT. I think it does give us an idea of what we're likely to be seeing. And so while I can live with either way, if we zero those out, if we leave them as is, I'm a happy camper regardless. I think it would be better to leave them as is.
I have Ms. Mattson and Mr. McClendon.
So we've kind of been hashing the idea around, but to get us to a decision on it, I'll make a motion and see what you think. All right, so I'm going to move to amend to reduce in 3 different places, but it's for the same purpose. Okay, so I'm going to amend to reduce the capital expenditures, which you see on the front page of your budget, by 10 of the 15,000 that's there for IT committee. So reduce that by 10,000. Also to reduce.
Pause for a moment, Ms.
Okay,
Mattson, if I may,
sure.
please.
Let me know when.
you're reducing the capital expenditures.
So leave 5,000 that's in there of the 15,000.
So you're reducing by 10.
Reducing by 10 to leave 5.
Okay. And it's a combined, what's the other change?
Okay, so the next line, it would show up on subline 8190. But it will, on the front page, roll into line 40 administrative costs. I would reduce that by 5,000, leaving 5,000 is there. So it would reduce from 10.
What's the subline?
Subline 8190. Let's see, there's, okay, the total number there is 64.4, but 10 of that is for IT-related requests.
And you want to
So-
reduce that by how much?
So I'd reduce it by 5,000. So I would leave 5,000 there for IT requests and leave 5,000 in capital for IT requests. And then the final part is on front page, line 50, affiliate support, which currently has 15,000. I would reduce that by 10 and leave 5 there.
By 10?
By 10,000 and leave 5. So the net effect would be to leave 5,000 in each of those 3 categories. 5,000 in capital expenditure for IT, 5,000 in the administrative IT expenses, and then 5,000 in affiliate support. So that's the motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Weir seconded it. Is that a point of information, Mr.
No,
Goldstein?
it's opposition to the motion.
Okay. Ms. Mattson, you need to speak to it more than...
Just a little bit. I mean, you already know the basic gist of my concern here is I prefer to come back and approve projects as we get them. And I want to leave a little bit there. I don't want to just zero them out because there may be, you know, some of the things that we've talked about may come up and not be a huge project that we necessarily need to have a big discussion about. So I'm going to leave a little starter money. But I want, if big projects come up, I really prefer that they come through here. We review the costs and decide on the costs. And I don't want in any way this to be construed as my lack of support for the subject matters or anything. I just want to approach it from a different direction and approve specific projects when we have more details.
Mr. Goldstein, you want to speak?
I support the directions you're taking.
You want to speak in opposition?
Yes, from the perspective of the IT committee, I think that this change would adversely affect the internal workings of the IT committee, that they're not really privy to these budget discussions. And Rich and I would come back and say, okay, well, we've got $10,000 to work with. How could we squeeze our 2 major projects into $10,000? And I think it would be a disincentive to try to get, you know, those 2 major projects done within the bounds of a very restricted budget, or having to explain to them that, yeah, this is what we have, but that's not really what the committee means. We could always come back and ask them for money and battle for I think it's just a bad move from the perspective of the IT committee.
I'd like to move to divide the question because I think the needs of the IT committee are somewhat different than the affiliate support. We're much more hardware oriented and have to buy stuff maybe. So I think that to try to combine them into the same bucket, I think we should look at those separately. But I will say that further, I actually somewhat agree with Dan and Alicia's concerns. But there is checks and balances. I don't think that the affiliate support can spend a nickel without authorization, at least from the chair. And I certainly entertain it from EZO that it doesn't get spent unless it even goes to the EC. But anyway, one last thing. Regardless of whether y'all funded at 0 or 15,000, I will not personally take that as a, you know, that we need to just stop working because again, we've got a lot of work to do regardless of whether it's funded or not.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
point of
McClendon.
information, has the question been divided?
It has not yet. Mr. McClendon, can you tell me exactly how you want to divide it?
Yeah, just split the IT separate from the affiliate support. Andrew says it's 2 separate.
Well, there's 3 things right now.
Yeah, but 2 of them were IT and 1 was affiliate support. So it would be 2 motions then, if I understand what he's saying. One is the capital expenditures and the subline 8190, so for 2 items.
So there's a $15,000 motion. and a $10,000 motion, that would be the nature of the division. Is there opposition to dividing the question? Mr. Goldstein, you object to dividing the question?
Yes, could I move to substitute, thank you, Aaron, Alicia's motion with a motion to add a proviso to the budget that no spending from either the IT or affiliate support committees above $1,000 would take place without a plan approved by the LNC.
Yeah. I don't think.
That's not the proper place to do that?
I don't think you can substitute into the division.
Okay.
The division has to happen first.
Okay.
Or not. So if you wanted to get to substitute, not dividing is probably the best way to do it. So we'll now move to a vote on the division. All in favor of dividing the question to one motion regarding the 10,000 reduction in CapEx and the 5,000 reduction in line 8190, and then another motion with the 10,000 reduction in line 50.
Call the question.
I'm just reading how what we're voting on, Sam. Raise your hand if you want to divide it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I count 9. Raise your hand if you're opposed to dividing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So with that, the question is divided into two questions. One regarding the IT committee, one regarding the affiliate support committee. With the indulgence of the body, can I pass the gavel to Mr. Laura and speak on this?
Sure.
There's the virtual gavel.
Since he wants to have a proviso, if he could, to each of these motions, add a proviso.
Okay.
So I want to speak against this reduction and against the reduction in these round numbers in the budget.
Which one are you speaking against since we divided the question? Which one are we doing first? Which one are we doing first, Arvin?
We are doing the IT first.
So the 15. All right. So I'll speak against that one and I'll make my comments relatively general. It is harder to do my job if I have to keep coming back to the LNC to ask permission every time we get a project. And if we have working committees with volunteers who have good ideas for things to do, and I have to come back to the committee, my job gets harder. So I understand that it's well within your purview to make my job harder, and that happens sometimes. But based on what I've seen from the IT committee so far, and also the affiliate support committee, I am very confident that the projects that they would recommend would both be good uses of money and well thought out before they ever came to me for approval. And so I think that it would be better to not reduce these round numbers and not make just a small placeholder budget, and actually make a budget that's big enough to encompass all the projects should they be good ones, so they could be done without the delay of either going to a mail ballot or coming back to the LNC.
Mr. Goldstein, were you going to speak on this?
I'll pass for now.
Mr. Weiner.
I'm willing to leave those numbers in there, but I would like to move a proviso similar to what Mr. Goldstein was suggesting, but for a larger number, so that if we have any large projects, they do have to come back to the LNC for review and approval. So the wording of your proviso, I would move that proviso that no spending for IT above $5,000 of capital, or 5,000 for the.
It's a split. You can't do them both at once. You want me to do it?
Okay, we go ahead.
Yeah, well, I move a substitute motion to the main motion, and that substitute motion is a proviso added to the budget for this line item, or for these two line items, that no spending above $5,000 related to IT initiatives shall take place without a plan approved by the LNC. Is that okay with you, Nick? That's not part of the motion.
Can I get the wording of that? So you can get it pass it.
You can do it if you want to do it.
Gotta make some
Mr. Chairman, is that, pardon me, point of inquiry, has the motion been seconded?
For the proviso,
A second.
Okay, no, I'm seconded.
I'd rather not have it, but I think I already made myself clear.
Would anybody else like to speak in favor of this motion?
Of the
Of the
proviso?
proviso.
This is a substitution.
Of the
So
substitute.
by voting for this, we are doing away with the other one.
Correct.
Makes the choice even.
So if you're voting yes, it means you do want to vote in favor of a $5,000 proviso, is that correct?
No.
No.
And maintain the current, otherwise the current
maintain-
numbers.
Stop doing the 15,000 reduction.
Okay, so we're
Instead of the reductions, we would instead
Have a
keep the
proviso.
numbers and have a proviso.
have a proviso instead of the reductions.
Are we, one further point of clarification, we're voting to substitute, and then do we get to vote again on the motion?
Yes.
after the substitute? Okay.
So,
So the current motion is a motion to substitute a proviso in place of a reduction. And if you vote yes, you're in favor of substituting the proviso in place of a reduction. It doesn't mean you're voting yes on the proviso, you're just voting to make this the new current amendment that we're currently voting on.
Yes.
point of information, so we could vote on the proviso and then vote against.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Before you
Are there any other points of information or any other debate on this motion, on this substitution of a proviso for a reduction? Hearing none, let's do this by a show of hands. Those in favor of substituting this proviso in place of the reduction, raise your hand. Those opposed? It passes. The motion on the floor right now is the actual proviso. Would anybody like to speak for or against this proviso? Is there any objection to this proviso? Hearing none.
Oh, no, objection.
Oh, okay. Mr. Hayes.
I just I think we need to quit micromanaging our chairman and executive directors. We've got the budget there. We need to rely on them to handle it. And in between, that's how things are set up. You know, we can always come back later if we don't have the money spent or at most. But
Anyone to speak against? Sorry, in favor. Sorry, Ms. Weiner.
Yeah, normally, I mean, that's why we have a budget, and once we've set the budget, then it's up to the chair and the executive director and such to implement it and spend it. We've approved the spending. But in this particular case, and subsequently, as I will argue, in the case of the Affiliate Support Committee, we don't have the necessary details to know what's involved there, and they've admitted they're still working on it, and that's fine. But until we hear those details, I don't want to give that kind of blank check that is normally involved in this kind of budgeting. And you know, I'm willing to accept the fact that we may very well need that amount of money for both the IT and the Affiliate Support Committee. But until I see those details, I don't want to give the kind of blank check that is normally involved in passing a budget. And that's why I'm in favor of this proviso.
We are currently out of time on this budget. Is there a motion to extend?
Extend for 10 minutes?
Is there objection to extending for 10 minutes? Hearing none, I believe Mr. Olson, you're next.
I'll just repeat what Dan said, that we have to get out of the business of micromanaging everything. I think the executive director, the chair, the staff, they're all too micromanaged, and we've got to give them the ability to proceed and get us where we want to go. We're not getting there right now.
Is there further debate on this motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. By show of hands, if you're, aye in this case means that you are in favor of adding the $5,000 restriction. A no means you are Oh, Proviso, sorry, the $5,000 Proviso, and a no means that you are not in favor of having that particular Proviso. Those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed? I'll also vote no. The motion fails. Are there any other amendments to the budget?
Yeah, we have the other half of that one.
Oh,
Do I get to have the gavel for the second half of the divided question?
For the second, we're on the second half. Okay, yeah. that's
With the
fine.
indulgence of the body, I'll take the gavel. Okay?
Seeing how that one went, it might be wise, just, we have the second half of the divided question, which is the reduction. It might be wise to, without, if there's no objection, withdraw that and just have a straight vote on a similar proviso for the affiliate support committee.
Mr. Goldstein, you have.
So moved, I'm okay with
You
it.
move to substitute a
Yes.
proviso that would put a $5,000 restriction on.
Similarly worded.
Okay.
So hearing no objection, we'll
And I
withdraw
don't,
the other.
right, and I don't hear any objection to that proviso, so we'll move to a vote on that issue, which is a motion to add a proviso where anything in excess of $5,000 spent by the affiliate support committee would be subject to the approval of the LNC. Is there any debate on this? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote, show of hands, all in favor of adding this proviso to the affiliate support committee budget line item. Please raise your hand. Count 4. Opposed? Count a lot. Just giving my head back. So yes, we're back to the main motion of the budget, and I have Mr. McClendon next. If you needed to be recognized, you were on deck at some point. Dr. Warner.
Mr. Chairman, it might be useful at this moment for us to take a moment just to be sure where we are, perhaps to the extent that the motions that have been approved, can we update?
I think it's updated.
Everything's been updated, that's fine.
Because we ended up making no changes
That's
from
right.
that round.
So-
I think there's updated.
Are there any other motions for amendments to the budget? I see no other motions to amendments to the budget. Is there any further debate on the budget itself?
I have a point of information. I just wanted to remember, this budget is for, how many direct mail fundraising letters? And then I think we're still doing +1 for the building, the office fund. How many letters was it in the budget?
7 + 1, I believe,
Was
is
it
that?
6 or 7 in the budget?
Robert, do you remember? It's probably what we did this year.
Trying to remember, we based it on 2014 plus a buildings where we did this year.
+1.
That's a good point, though, if you want to increase the number of.
No, I just wanted to, I couldn't remember the number. There was something between 6 and 8.
Robert's looking.
Yeah, it's like the same amount as this year.
That isn't an answer.
I'm going to ask
What do we have, at 7? Or
point of information from the executive director. Would you like to send 12 fundraising letters this year? Would it be a good idea?
I think 9 would be a good number. 6 this year, 12 ideally, 9 is nice.
And that would be an increase of 2 over what we budgeted for
I
at this
think it's
point?
3. I mean, look at my presentation. There's
Yeah, I
only
was gonna say
4
it's in
parts.
your-
Because one of them is separately budgeted.
So 3. And what's a direct mail letter, a house letter cost, expense-wise?
Divide 68,400 by 6 and times that by. Do that real quick.
Come on, they have CPAs in the room.
I used to be good at math.
So you're gonna increase the budget?
I just wanted to know what the number was.
Did anyone get a ballpark number per house
If
letter?
that would be 102,600.
10.
$100,000 per letter? How much per letter?
Oh, the budget line item would go to 102,600 from, where is it at, 68?
68,400 to 102,600.
And the revenue increase, ballpark?
Okay, hang on. Somebody give me that. Good question, I'll do that.
Direct revenue line.
There. Okay, so house fundraising in general, 132,600 divided by 6 times 9, 198,900.
It's not guaranteed.
I would make a point that if you increase the number of house letters, chances are the revenue will not increase by the same amount. There'll be some dilution, so.
What was the revenue?
198,900.
No, sorry, what was the expense line? 102 something?
102, hold on.
Mr. Chairman, you to refer to specific law.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I completely lost track of which.
That would be for everybody.
7010-10 is House General Expense. That's the cost line for sending letters. And 4010-10 is the revenue line for the money coming in from House letters. And if we went to 9, what was the calculated number for the expense line?
The expense, 102,600.
102,600. So, and if we assumed flat revenue increase, it would go, the revenue line would go to 198,900.
Correct.
But if we assumed less than a linear increase, something in the order of 170 sounds, does that sound about right, Mr. Benedict? 3 more letters, can we get another 40 grand?
Can we look at the revenue from like a few years past?
I was looking at this just for information. If you take this year's fundraising,
Those lines?
Let's look at 2011. Is it viewable, or I should have it in front of me in print probably, but I'm just.
you included it in the PDF staff, in your staff report. I don't know if it's in the printed version.
226, 148.
That's what we raised in 2011?
Correct.
I was ED then, the whole year?
How many?
Breakdown the actual.
That's not bad.
Point of inquiry, how many newsletters did we do that year?
2011.
Or how many fundraising letters did we do?
In 2011, do you know how many house letters went out?
2011, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
probably in my
6,
staff
7,
report,
8.
count the
We
bar
did,
charts.
we did 9 in 2011.
That's a nice number.
And one of those, none of those were building funds.
So.
And so far this year I count 6, and I guess there's one more from like November or something you sent. So 7.
Mr. Tomaso, did you have a motion to increase the House fundraising expense in the revenue line?
May all the gods help me. I will authorize one more letter than planned. That would be my motion. So the expense of 1 letter, and then plus someone else will do the math, like the average of a sort of an average letter amount.
So it's 11 grand to send a letter, plus or minus.
And their average.
The average take is plus or minus 20 grand.
Okay, so.
I mean, tell me if I'm.
No, that sounds right.
Point of information, how many letters have we had each year? I think we need to show.
We've been doing, in the past, we've been doing 9 to 12.
Except this last year we did 7.
7. So I could live with 8 fundraising letters.
Why not 9?
Because I can live with 8.
I can live with 9.
Well, I'll make a motion, and you can amend it. So I'll make a motion for 8 letters, so it's 11, so plus 11,000 on the expense, and plus. So we're doing one more letter, so plus 11,000 on the expense line, and plus 20,000 on the revenue line.
Can you give me budget line items?
Let's first see whether there's a second for Mr. Tomaso's motion. Is that a second? Okay.
Or is there orders of the day? We're up.
We are out of time.
Move to extend by 15 minutes.
Objection.
No, there's an objection to an extension for 15. Is there an objection to an extension for 5 to take care of this?
5.
Okay. Mr. Johnson, were you seeking to be recognized?
Yes, can I move to increase by 11,000 times 3 for one of them and 20,000 times 3?
That sounds like.
What lines were those, Greg?
33,000 on the expense line, and that sounds like 60,000 on the revenue line. Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
I hear a second. Is there objection to that motion?
The numbers again, 33,000 on the expense side, 60,000 on the revenue side.
That is numbers.
That's what, 10 letters?
Read me budget line numbers.
Yeah, budget line number 701010 is the expense line. That will increase by 33. And 401010 is the revenue line, which would increase by 60. Mr. Bittner first, then Mr. Goldstein, then Mr. Redpath, then Mr. Proviso.
We can't assume linear increase in the revenue based on just sending more letters, but I think you'd be safe to say, based on my experience sending fundraising letters, that with 9 letters sent, you would probably get the revenue that we're seeing based on 6, with the addition of 2 in revenue for those 3 letters sent from a diminishing returns perspective. So I would say that if you increase the expense by 3 letters, approximately $33,000, you would only expect, and we can be surprised if we get more, but increase the revenue by 40,000 ballparks.
Is that a
in the numbers.
motion to amend the amendment?
Just raising the objection that I had to the amendment.
I would support it,
Yes, I would substitute that motion.
Is there objection to substituting that with a $33,000 expense and a $40,000 revenue?
Yes, I would
I would
object.
You would object to that?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. But there is a second for the amendment, so Mr. Weiner, would you speak against the amendment?
Yeah.
To the amendment?
Yes, as I look at this, the 132,600 is based on 6 letters, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So we're already discounting the estimate of how much each letter brings by some amount. If you divide 132,600 by 6. So I think that it's reasonable to estimate 20,000 per letter revenue and 11,000 per letter expense, and that's what I'd like to keep it at.
Clarify with Mr. Bittner.
Go ahead.
For the verifying what goes in the minutes, would you please restate your amendment to Mr. Johnson's motion?
That we increase line 701010 by 33,000.
That is the same.
That is the same.
401010.
And on 401010, that we increase it by 40,000 to 172,600.
So the only change to the revenue for
Correct.
20,000 less than Johnson's.
To account for diminishing returns.
I think looking at this from a linear standpoint, it doesn't take into account that the letters have varying degrees of success. So having 2 letters but not having that chance to do that other one, that could be the one that makes a lot of return on the investment. Have we ever had any letters actually lose money? Or have they always broke even? So that said, we have we based on the track record, we shouldn't not expect to lose anything, but we have a greater chance to hit a home run by taking more chances at the plate, so to speak.
Mr. Hagan, then Mr. Olson.
Yes, increasing
Mr.
the
Hagan
budget.
first. Mr. Hagan first.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, keep it on deck.
I'd rather be conservative with this, go with the 40,000, so we don't get the image that we have an extra 20,000 to spend, and then ends up not coming in. If it does come in, yeah, we can always modify.
Yeah, so we're doing it, though we're taking a chance.
Roll it over to next year, for ballot access expenses.
Mr. Olson.
Yes, we're not telling the executive director he has to send 9 letters. We're authorizing him to send 9 letters as he sees fit. And I'm sure that Mr. Benedict will, if he thinks it's not going to be a big success, he won't send the letter.
Is there any other debate on this amendment to the amendment?
Right, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so we'll move all the previous questions. We'll start with the amendment to the amendment, which would be to make the revenue increase not be 60,000, but rather have it be 40,000. All in favor of that, please raise your hand. Opposed? That amendment passes. The primary amendment is to increase line 701010 for direct mail general expense by $33,000 and increase line 401010, the fundraising revenue line for direct mail, by $40,000. All in favor of that amendment, please raise your hand. Opposed? Passes. We'll now move to the main motion, which is the budget as amended.
Can you see the new?
And after a brief screen change, we'll move to a vote on the budget. That will be a roll call vote. And I'll have Ms. Metzen call the roll as soon as somebody can verify for me that y'all are looking at the budget as amended.
Which lines just changed?
4010, or the roll-up lines?
The front, yeah, which roll-up lines changed?
Roll-up would be donations 21 and fundraising costs 32.
I heard 32 and 21. you said?
Correct.
Those are not on the screen.
Yes, Mr. Johnson, for more information.
When you finish, I would like you to just tell us, for civilians, how big is the budget and how big is the service? That's the bottom line.
So we're expecting $1,291,300 revenue. Subtract out costs for support revenues, expenses of $283,065, plus other expenses, $912,617. Subtract out the $75,000 for the capital expenses, to end up with a surplus of $23,617.
Move to the roll as soon as Ms. Mattson tells me she's ready. Ms. Mattson?
Voting no.
Mr. Olson?
Aye.
Ms. Kirkland?
Yes.
Mr. Tomaso?
Pass.
Mr. Goldstein?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Dr. Wright?
Yes.
Mr. Bittner?
Aye.
Mr. McClendon?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Hagan?
Yes.
Mr. Redpath?
Yes.
Mr. Moran?
Yes.
Mr. Tomaso?
Aye.
And I will vote yes. Dr. Martin?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say, I'd like to thank you, the other members of the executive committee. We handled very nicely. And also, I'd like to thank you. Also, there was a motion that was passed at the September meeting that basically brought us together for discussion of this via teleconference. I think this budget process worked about as smoothly as I should like to see it forward, and I thank my colleagues for their work.
Ms. Mattson?
I'd like to extend for 2 minutes for a very specific purpose for consideration of the motion to refer a research project to the UCC.
Is there objection to extending for that purpose? I hear no objection.
All right, so I will move that the LNC refers to the EPCC the task of researching past employee contract structures and making recommendations for going forward.
Second.
Is there objection to that motion? Without objection, that will be referred to the EPCC. I believe I didn't book a recess in the agenda for this morning, but I'd like to take a 15-minute. Is that, yeah, Dr. Mark?
Mr. Chairman, that would be fine. It would be appropriate just to be sure that we're all on the same page as to what items we have remaining for discussion.
Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3 10-minute items for new business with previous notice. We have 20, 10, 15, 30, 45, 1 hour. We've got approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes left on the agenda. I do not anticipate that we will use all of it with the assistance of the rest of the body. So I would say that we would reconvene at 25 after, because I know that this is about the time when you might want to pack things up in the hotel. So at 25 after 11, we'll be back. Well, I assume we ran out because it's sat here. Sure.
Yes.
Exactly. Do you have, I tend to be paranoid about getting out to the airport.
We can get the contingent, and how many, if you want, I'll look at that, let me do this? Sure. And then I'll look at the spreadsheet. Sure.
I've already checked in, but I haven't filled in my boarding pass. They told me there's a kiosk where I can get my boarding pass.
It's right down towards the business center.
Okay.
Or you could do it right in the business center too. You can just log into the website and there's a printer in there.
Okay.
Wait a second, the affiliate runs that there. So,
I'm getting there to time.
yeah, it's probably that they updated the thing after.
Would you rather we just send you a check?
Because there's a difference between the revenue, the projected revenue and the cost.
Sure, my reputation. What's the appropriate?
So, when they change the number, it increases the, yeah. No, that's it. They were originally going to.
Well, I don't know. Just send me what the appropriate address is. Because I'd rather give them.
There's always, and honestly, with the way that process is, it comes longer.
It's a walk is 45 cents, not 49 cents. However, just scribble that around and I'll send you a check. That way you don't have to pay that up front.
Actually, I was gonna say, I know where to find it, but then again, with the way you travel. Well, you gotta do class every once in a while. Yeah. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate food and the chauffeur. Usually when I'm done.
You know, just being blunt about what this thing goes towards.
Yeah, well, that's why I was voting no on the budget, so that surpluses.
At least we passed the surplus.
At time you want.
It's zero.
We need at least $100,000.
I know, but good projects, fundraising should be better. More productive.
Well, we're also, I think we're coming in, people more and more are now starting to think about third party. And
Yeah, but they're not joining us though.
Well, but that's.
Because we have to do a better job of being.
I think,
and it's, you
what
know.
we talked about this weekend, I think is good, positive stuff going forward.
We've got more candidates coming over, they're gonna run, like Mr. Brandon said, no, that's gonna go take Arvin's, to teach you driving.
We haven't had enough exemplary candidates, because a lot of people identify parties with exemplary candidates, and there were a lot of people who identified with Harry Brown. Harry Brown was a very good face. We have a similar good face as our presidential candidate.
And he was already known.
That's true. That's true.
Changes, and you have to make a
I was watching Excel spreadsheet, that's
Things happen like what's happened over the last few days that we should be close.
Yeah, and I was looking at the money.
You can pretty much take out Republican. I mean, that's what it's doing. That's what it's doing. It's crazy.
Education stuff.
So it's like, what else would you straight your Republicans? Conservative. Unless you're really such a conservative.
One of Steve's top assistants.
Louisiana education, voted for that, so it's, I have to make sure that slice and small, and look who's the best on the planet.
Felt flat too.
But that's definitely me.
What would happen if they go for the roof?
Doesn't pay very well.
Didn't mention words.
But it's heroes always.
I said,
But no, I mean.
It's tonight.
Yeah, there's.
Aaron.
Oh, really? Yeah, I went that route. That's fine.
It's
more fun.
That was my bad. They have to know.
I'm not sure.
They're gonna get to that. You know? What's the last thing?
And the assistant I was talking to was probably more.
What's your name?
Aaron ran a really
Steve's career.
Jason Brown's
I need to write one too, but because Aaron never did after that.
And I don't know what happened. Today, I mean, how did they get bounced back to that? There's no maintenance insurance. I think it's ironic that it's the conservative Republicans and the liberal Democrats together who made those hires.
Two people? Okay. That's a lot of, yeah.
Maybe they got.
So that was all people that knew you probably if you didn't get into it.
The loan lines were pretty much jams. I even called Mary Landers. So you're good. And I said, can you last vote,
Especially if I can tell you to talk.
do what our constituents want. Just one time, do what we do.
Yeah.
Of course, I got not call, Bill Cassidy's office, but I want to get in touch with him.
Yeah.
His office, and
tell them I'm disappointed.
Mine is spread out, lots of little towns and cities. It's a big geographic area, but it probably has, it's the same size as
Yeah, and I'm, don't know how much to rest of the
How many counties, how many states do we have listed in the legislature? I mean,
You have been doing good here, there, and,
There's six.
I just beat them up issue by
So
issue.
it's pretty close.
That's how I
There's
end
eight.
up
And
doing
now,
it. You know, it's
we
like,
have-
in this issue, that kind of thing. He normally responded, Vitter would
So you can
respond.
divide it by 8.
Mary never responded on any of the issues, really.
Once in a while, I will get a response from Mary. It's always
500 lost, probably.
Well, you can't receive.
Yeah, a lot of folks, I can just,
She may have responded once. Even if it was like a more civil liberties type thing.
sometimes they go places and speak.
She still would respond.
Privacy issues. Not actually, I'm streaming that. But, I've got this spot that's very low.
I mean, but basically a position statement.
Some midterm senate.
Yes, I work with them. It was obviously a form where I went to thousands of people. But I have gotten a handful from police and federal that give the word person they were detained, so they were tailored to a specific kind of certain groups of people. They address more specific points, I think, rather than just a position statement.
It's either he's responding or an attorney told him like this.
Well, yeah.
And I did, right?
Yeah, I gotta reach out. I mean, the only question that are choice. Anyway, I mean, it's like they're communicative. They're really frustrated. No, there's
I don't want to run back to the desk to try and do something, but you should be back. You should be back in 5.
I got some of that.
But basically, when they were out,
I thought they had the running that's right now.
Where I absolutely believe that's the problem.
I mean, it's not whole day.
And I'm saying, what's the guy who pretends?
I know. So that's the challenge. And they have a lot of media
To see I had seen him speak the night before, and he knew he was going to do something. I didn't know what.
He went in pretending like he was gonna fix the phone.
my county background.
Any of the provinces. I mean, I called all over the state, I went to DC, went to the federal. There were other people in the elevator doing the same thing.
Oh, really?
So we went in, I was sure you
So they were going like straight to that. Yeah.
You know, we were expressing our frustration, saying, you know,
There was one that you got through like to everybody this one time. Where like on a major call, and you got through it. Every single one of them. They were all like waiting on calls to go. Okay, thanks. You know, they're just like writing it down. Yes, no, or something. You know.
when I called, I forget who signed this up. The aide was very clearly making notes. What I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
That's what we want to do. Right.
You had like a whole bunch of people calling you about it. What do you think? Only so many are gonna call. You know, or so many are gonna
Those who
write.
call, those who do call, influence on others. I'm convinced Mary had years.
Louisiana companies and stuff like that. So she knows as much for the Republicans as
I don't subscribe to that, but I understand. It took me longer to make that kind of work. That was pretty neutral. Privately, more supporting the ideas. I knew it didn't have to change. And I knew that the runoff.
Felicia, I made 20 of each. I think that's sufficient. Don't you?
I didn't know if I got one of those, because it was just like either one of them, I don't care, so let's talk. Yeah, just pick it out, because I didn't care about it.
I mean, 2 years, like,
what I had to do was not budget so every 7 times
things like that. They don't.
Well, I mean, the thing is,
they might be too close together, but there are some where there's.
And so that's actually picking up.
We should see.
At least watch the DA side. Now we gotta get to the sheriff's side.
He's the biggest time.
The DA was in since the 80s. The sheriff was in since the 90s. And they had the whole thing with some total prosecution, pro-prosecution. You know, all the chickens and stuff.
But
I see it's like.
So, I shouldn't have done this thing. I wasn't sure what else was in my life. Some of the things I did in my life when I was wrestling. Action.
Scott, what flight are you on? What flight are you on? You going back to Charlotte today, right?
No.
Oh, not?
I'm flying direct.
Okay.
I was gonna drop it.
I'm not flying out to 6, so I'm probably just gonna check my baggage and go walking around.
Or if y'all want, for the checking the baggage, Arvin's gonna be doing a training over back at the restaurant. He's gonna do who's driving, and you guys can just leave the stuff there. And
I think I'd rather walk around the French Quarter.
Why didn't you say you couldn't leave the stuff there and walk around the French Quarter?
Which is closer?
2 minutes.
Probably a hotel, right?
Half a minute?
Because I'll probably just grab a cab in the French Quarter and stop here and then run out to the airport.
Do they come back? They do. All right, so make sure I'm right. I've got.
You got a direct flight back?
15. I've got.
I'm not heading out until 7 next week. They only have 2 non-stops.
I need to get there, I mean,
Yeah, there's
One's
nothing.
at like 9 in the morning, the other's at 7.
It's better than having to ship planes and stuff.
Yeah.
There's nothing between in and out of the city. I don't know nothing, at least until the city airline starts flying.
I like to get to the airport as close to possible.
Did you read the last one?
I just never know.
So.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay.
Basically,
What,
Well, I don't want to tell you.
way around the car, the valet doesn't.
I don't know, I was thinking about it.
I'm assuming that Alan's not
Somewhere
going to
since it's
bill for
$4.35
tax.
That's okay.
All right.
Well, I don't know if it's but I guess I'd say, let's get it 4:45, then we're not gonna be much traffic.
We're back.
But I'll give you some more information.
The next item on the agenda is going to be new business with previous notice. The first item on that is to amend the policy manual to have the Convention Oversight Committee maintain a convention archive. There are 10 minutes for this motion. This motion is Ms. Mattson's motion. Is there any, do you feel there's a need for debate or discussion on the motion, Ms. Matson?
I was getting back to speed here. We are at, got it. All right.
I apologize. I'm sure we're bringing it back here.
Trying to do something at once. Okay, so you've got it. If you found it in your policy manual, it should be in the motion submitted in writing. I do want to draw your attention to the fact that I added footnotes since the version was sent out by email, so that the text of the change is the same. I added the technical.
We're in tab 6 for everybody.
First item in tab 6. So this change impacts section 103.2 and 2.02.5, and I think I explained pretty well by email. Just to summarize, I want to extend the term of the Convention Oversight Committee for 90 days following the convention, which requires a change to 103.2. And then in the other section, additionally task them with updating the archive with material comparable to what's there now. Because I don't want the effort to lose its usefulness because it doesn't get updated. The footnotes are added just for the technical references to Roberts for what would happen in absence of this, that it would not, the committee would not exist beyond the end of the term. And notice the first clause added in 202.5, the committee may begin its work as soon as its members from the LNC are appointed. The purpose of that is typically the 3 non-LNC members who are appointed to the Convention Oversight Committee are kind of the event planners, and that phase tends to happen closer to the end of the term. But whether or not those people are added now, the rest of the committee can begin site selection process, and people that are interested in planning the event would likely come along later. So I wanted to make sure that the existing Convention Oversight Committee could proceed with site selection without having to wait for the event planners to be named, and they may or may not. We've experienced before that the event planner is interested in the site selection part of the process. So that's the rationale for that.
Second. I got one from Mr. Redpath already. Is there objection to adopting this motion? Hearing no objection, it is adopted. The next item on the agenda is to amend the policy manual to modify the awards committee structure and appointment.
So this should be the next section. Oh, wait.
I don't have this one.
I'm not sure. Was there a printed language?
Next is binder. Okay, so I can tell you, we have the policy manuals, right? So in the policy manual, I will direct you to section 103.1. So you can eyeball it, and I'll read the language to you. Okay, so section 103.1.
Page 14. Thank you. It's more helpful than page
Awards committee,
103.1.
we're looking at changes only in the column for member selection. Where currently it reads volunteers or LNC chair.
Ms. Matson.
Okay, so the member selection currently reads volunteers or LNC chair if volunteers do not emerge. And I propose to replace that language with LNC, but retain the rest. Each cycle strike to keep 2 past members. All right, so strike the volunteers and the parenthetical and replace that with the LNC. That's the motion.
Mark?
Mr. Chairman, I have the honor of serving.
We need a second, I'm sorry.
Second.
Okay. Yes, now Dr. Webb.
Mr. Chairman, I have the honor of serving as the chair of the awards committee. Just so the members of the committee are aware, during the previous term, we actually did elect, the LNC actually did elect, there were enough people who were interested in participating in the position. We actually had an election at the July 2012 meeting of the LNC.
Ms. Mattson, would you like to speak to it briefly?
Yes, just to kind of summarize what I've said online, I think the current language is just kind of awkward. It was kind of adopted hastily. It was an idea that there was a motion to make it policy, and boom, there it was. And it fell on my head to figure out how to manipulate an idea into policy manual language, and it didn't work too well. So I think, currently it says the chair picks only if there aren't enough volunteers. Well, if there are too many volunteers, we have the situation we had last year. And what if we get exactly 5 volunteers, but they're not people that we would elect, or we stuck with volunteers to raise their hands first? So I just prefer that we clean this up, and in general, I prefer that the LNC select this committee rather than just one person, and that's the rationale.
Is there objection to this motion? Hearing no objection, this motion is adopted. We'll next move to Ms. Mattson.
I'm going to ask, just take 30 seconds here, hopefully. Check your policy manual section 202.4, which is on page 24 of the policy manual. This is not something I asked you
Ms.
about.
Mattson, please.
Page 24.
Page 24 of the policy manuals, 202.4. Would anyone object to my changing the word in the last 2 paragraphs? There are 2 occurrences of it is hopeful that at least one recipient, and it is hopeful that at least one recipient. Dan Carlin brought this to my attention that we probably mean the word hoped there rather than hopeful. Would there be any objection to me changing hopeful to hopeful?
There is no objection to that. And if there was an objection to it, I didn't see it. The next item on the agenda is Ms. Mattson's motion to amend the policy manual for constructive candidate portrayal. Is that printed in the binder? I did not see it.
I didn't see it in the binder. I did send it in advance.
It was sent in advance.
Okay, I can read it to you.
That would be good.
Could it go up on the screen by any chance?
Yeah, you could. Tell you what, it's going to be easier. Instead of taking the time to book it, I just type it here. So I'm going to open a Word document and type it.
It's going to be bloody now.
Mr. Vogel will assume the chair for this item. Can everyone read that? Or does it need to be bigger?
Ms. Mattson, would you like to speak additionally?
I need to
is there a second? Ms. Madison, would you like to speak in addition to what you've already said about your motion?
Yeah, basically this policy requires that our public communications portray candidates as people who are trying to get elected instead of just spoilers who are kind of getting their kicks by poking other people in the eye. I think you don't win over voters with portraying ourselves that way. I think all we get is blame for that kind of approach rather than, hey, they ran a good campaign. Instead we get, hey, they're just here to screw up the party for other people. Large numbers of state chairs have complained repeatedly about this approach in our public communications, but it still happens. The front page of the most recent edition of LP News was basically an entire article dedicated to here are all these candidates that quote could potentially determine the winner. Not that they would win, but they would pick which of the two evil other candidates would win. And that was the front page of our LP News. And I brought a copy if anyone wanted to see it, but I'm not going to push it out unless I ask. So, first, my obvious philosophical point that I don't think we're spoiling elections for anyone because no one is entitled to a vote. They have to earn it. Second, I don't think it's true that we are really switching the outcomes all that frequently. Exit polls suggest we pull fairly evenly from both sides, or our voters otherwise would not have voted at all. Third, I think we just shoot ourselves in the foot for ballot access fights. I think it encourages the Republicans in states like Illinois and Ohio to come after us harder, try to kick us off the ballot, and it just increases our legal costs because they believe that we're spoiling them. Instead, we should be demonstrating that we're not spoilers because it costs us a lot of money for those fights. So we don't even really see ourselves as serious candidates. And I don't think that's what we want the public to believe. We want them to believe that we're here because we want to win. And so I think this is just generally self-destructive to our image.
Right now, I have Red Pat, Lark, Sarwalk, Nelson. Would any of those more like to speak against this motion?
I will speak against.
I believe I have Dr. Lark first.
Yes, while I'm very sympathetic to Ms. Madison's general perspective on this, I don't like being portrayed as a spoiler, as actually the miserable bastards continue running with real spoilers. I prefer not to see this in the policy manual. I would prefer to give the editor and the staff the latitude to structure the story as they see fit. Again, I'm not going to cry myself to sleep that this is passed, but I would, all things being arbitrarily not approve this.
Would anybody like to speak in favor of those? Mr. Red Pat, speak in favor?
Yes, I'll speak in favor. I think that I would second that. I will say that, I've spoken with a political director about this in the past. She is strongly of the opinion that we need to spoil time and again to become a significant factor in U.S. politics. I understand her point. I more disagree with it than because I don't think that half of political success is through the role of spoiler in this nation, and I agree with other comments by the Secretary. I plan to vote in favor of this motion.
Mr. Sarwalk.
Yes. Briefly, we'll start with a visual aid. If you flip to your binder, tab 2, near the end of the staff report, you'll see a trend line and a scatter plot of the Libertarian vote percentages based on the closeness of the election. And what you'll note is that the data show that the conventional wisdom in this party is incorrect. It has long been thought in this party that if you have a race that is not close, that the wasted vote syndrome doesn't raise its ugly head, and we get higher vote totals when people feel safe voting for the Libertarian. The data actually show a small trend the other direction. The closer the race is, and the more our candidates control the balance of power, the more votes our candidates get. Now, whether it's name recognition, whether it's the fact that, frankly, the only time where we're at now as candidates that we matter is when the mainstream media can say that we control the balance of power. Now, whether they're correct on it is the answer is different in different places. In the Sarvis race, it was 2-1 for McAuliffe. You know, other times it goes the other direction. It really depends on issue choice for the candidates. The idea that we should not draw attention to the fact that we hold the balance of power in a race is not an idea I agree with. I think we should draw attention to the votes that we get. I also think that those vote percentages we get in close races are a better example of where our strength really is, because it's not the safe race where we get those percentages. We get those percentages when people know that my vote could potentially have gone to one of the other old party candidates. And I think it's on net positive. As far as drawing attention of the Republicans or having them make ballot access worse, they know we're here. Whether or not we put an article in LP News or we go on TV and say we control the balance of power, they're going to be aware of us no matter what. The reason that we want to use this judiciously when it's appropriate and in the right situation is that sometimes that gets us coverage that we would not otherwise get in the media, because there are reporters and editors who won't cover us unless we can tie our message into their book for their story. You can't spoil tainted meat. There's one other serious problem with this proposal, especially as a policy manual, is this would actually make it so that neither myself nor Mr. Benedict nor Ms. Howell can even say what the polls are. Once it gets close, we're not allowed to talk about it, because that would be, as it says here, either directly or by implication, such as noting that the candidate's performance spans the margin between the two other candidates. I can't talk about the fact that my candidate has 5% and the other candidates are, you know, within 5% of each other. All of a sudden now I can't talk about it because I'm implying that we could spoil. So this proposal would bind the public communications of the party. Now, I understand that different state chairs have different opinions about how best to do messaging and what their strategy is in their state. But this is a national committee and it's different from the state parties. A lot of the politics is done there, but we have national messaging. And having certain state chairs with certain opinions, and basically this would codify in the policy manual that some state chairs' opinions are the ones that we are going to bind ourselves to, and other state chairs' opinions are the ones we are not. Because there are state chairs who want to do this.
We are currently out of time on this item. Is there a motion to extend?
Extend to 5 minutes?
Is there objection to extending by 5 minutes? Hearing none, I believe, Mr. Bittner, were you going to speak in favor?
Oh,
okay. Mr. Olson, you're next.
Yes, the spoiler business is basically a perception. We have to deal with the perceptions rather than the truth. Just want to make sure you get that point. Now, I put 100 candidates on the ballot in Colorado. I don't know of any one of them that's ever said, yeah, I want to be a spoiler. Okay, so in essence, our activities are not that negative, and we should be careful to not micromanage the staff, the executive director, the chair, in saying, well, if you mention the word spoiler, you're going against the policy manual. And two other points is, I think the chair and the executive director, the APRC, or whatever it is, should use the spoiler situation and not brag about being a spoiler. I don't think we should be doing that. But we should be using that as an opportunity to inform the public that we don't have a choice. If we're going to be a political party, and we aspire to be a political party, we have to run candidates. We don't run candidates to be spoilers. And the business of being a spoiler is because of the plurality voting system that we have. And we should use those opportunities to educate the public that the Republicans and the Democrats make the rules, and they can eradicate the word spoiler from the political lexicon by simply adopting alternative voting methods. And we should use that to push alternative voting methods, because I think we all agree here at that's gonna be the most, that would be the most drastic thing to improve our success politically is to push for eradicating plurality voting. So I would agree with the basic principle that we don't want to brag about being spoilers, but I'd like to see the chair, the executive director have the opportunity to make the most of it by saying, hey, they control the rules, we're a political party, we don't have a choice, they can do away with spoilers in a heartbeat.
The people who are on deck, Bittner, Wiener, Hayes, is anybody going to speak in favor? Okay, we'll go down the list. Mr. Bittner.
Oh.
Okay. Mr. Wiener.
Yeah, first of all, just very briefly regarding that scatter plot, I doubt that any of that's statistically significant. If you had printed out the R-squared value from the spreadsheet, I suspect it would be pretty low.
The converse would be statistically insignificant as well. That would do worse.
I agree with that. It shows that in neither direction is statistically significant. I want to discourage using the term spoiler and making that argument, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with our noting at times and making use of the fact that we are a factor in close elections. And the importance of that is that as far as the media is concerned, the horse race aspect is usually the most important thing for getting media attention. And if it's a close race and there's a Libertarian in there, as we've just seen, the media pays a lot of attention to the fact that there is a Libertarian in the race. And even, we can go ahead and say that, hey, we're not necessarily just taking votes away from Republicans. There's evidence that shows it might go the other way, and it will depend on the situation and the candidate and the circumstances and so on. But we are an important factor, and the media treats us as such in close elections. And while I think we need to be careful about the spoiler aspect, I don't think we need to start putting something into the policy manual that's going to restrict that.
Mr. Cook, were you going to speak in favor?
No.
Oh, okay. Let's go to the list. Mr. Hayes.
Okay, do we have any sort of policy already in place that restricts any of the language that comes out for this stuff? Because, in other words, I have a severe problem with the term spoiler and those negative sort of things, but I can see some value in showing that we are becoming relevant, so, my big problem is with the messaging. As long as the messaging is not negative, so.
We are currently actually out of time on this item. Is there a motion to extend?
Extend 5.
Objection.
Objection.
Okay, it's been moved to extend. I guess we'll go right to a vote. Those in favor of extending for 5 minutes. Oh, sorry, is there a second to extending?
A second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to extend for 5 minutes. Those in favor, please raise your hand.
I'd like to hear a mismatch symbol.
Those opposed? It looks like the ayes have it. It just requires
It's 2/3 vote.
2/3.
I don't think we had 2/3. Yeah. Okay, so the motion fails for lack of 2/3 votes. We'll proceed to a vote on this motion. This is substantive, so it will be a roll call vote.
Point of inquiry, could I just get a clarification? Do we have some policy that already exists that restricts that sort of language?
I don't believe there's a policy that restricts language. There's the APRC review that restricts us from doing anything that paints the party in a negative light or violates platform or bylaws. Is that?
I can answer a little sort of kind of. If you look on pages 39 and 40 of your policy manual, there's a section for LP News. This is specifically for LP News, not every communication, but there are things like it shall focus on these types of articles. It shall lead to other articles, things like book reviews and in-depth debated questions where there's no consensus. So there are some topical restrictions that we have already put in policy.
Also look on page 41, shared quality communications.
Yeah, so basically it's a judgment call. If the communication is determined to be detrimental to the image of the party, then we need to recall it. And if, I mean, just how it works, if communications go out and it's determined that that's not good messaging based on feedback from it, then internally I'll talk about it. Don't use that messaging anymore. But it's not codified, to answer the point of information.
Okay, if there are no other points of information, then we'll proceed to the roll. Ms. Matthews, can you take the roll, please?
I'm going to vote aye. Mr. Olson?
Nay.
Ms. Kirkland?
No.
Mr. Tomaso?
Aye.
Mr. Goldstein?
No.
Mr. Hayes?
No.
Mr. Weiner?
No.
Dr. Lark?
No.
Mr. Bittner?
No.
Mr. McClendon? Mr. Johnson?
No.
Mr. Hagan?
No.
Mr. Redpath?
Yes.
And Mr. Vora?
I'll also vote no.
And would the chair like to vote?
No. I vote no. Tricky.
So I see 3 in favor and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 opposed, 3 to 12.
The next item on the agenda is new business without previous notice, and we'll move to Mr. Bittner, 20 minutes regarding branding and LP logo design.
I want to thank you guys for taking the time to listen to me here. There was a talk of a presentation. There is none. It's me wanting to begin a discussion. In 2006, we changed the logo to what it currently is. That's 8 years. During that time, we've seen significant changes in the world, in the way that we communicate, and we've also seen our competitors not only change their logos, but one of them has changed them twice to be simpler, to be easier, and to be easily identifiable with the party as it stands, or their parties. Ours is not so much. We also have a very difficult time for state affiliates to modify it for their individual affiliate. Not everybody has the glorious logo that the Libertarian Party of Georgia has. Some of us are not too impressed with what Indiana, who I do represent and live there.
They could be changed, you know, both of them.
What is Georgia?
So,
probably the Confederate flag.
So I just want to, I want us to consider and discuss the possibility of getting that ball rolling. The way that I see it, we essentially have 5 options. I know that there are some people in this room who have seen the option that I like, and I'll not note which one that is. But Mr. Vora has talked about the possibility of engaging a crowdsourcing opportunity. We have the option of going to a graphic designer with the idea that we have, this is what we want, and give us some options and we'll pick from that. We have a very active Design for Liberty group that wants to have input, and some have proposed logos that they would like to have seen. We also have people who have done work on spec just for the opportunity to have it considered and have provided justification for their efforts and have done a very well-rounded presentation, and I know that some of the people have seen that. And then we have what I believe is a non-option, which is no action. So the purpose for me with regard to this particular item was for us to set a course to change our logo from something that is nearly a decade old, and I realize that the wheels of a committee move very slowly, and so I'd like for us to have a new logo before that one is a decade old.
Point of information for Mr. Bittner.
Yes, sir.
Would you consider it to be too aggressive a goal for your purposes to have a new logo no later than July 1st of 2015?
I I'd like to see one tomorrow, but that's fine. I also have one that I wish to champion in that process. Again, I noted the options, but I am sold on one particular aspect. But in order to have that conversation, I wanted to begin that conversation. This is a journey of 1,000 miles, and this is our first step.
All right, I'll go to Mr. Goldstein, then Mr. Redpath, then Mr. Laura.
I'm not going to comment on the value or need for a new logo whatsoever because, you know, I'm ambivalent on that question. However, from the IT committee's perspective, the sooner the better if we decide to do something. Because if we're going to redesign a website, it's kind of important to know what logo to put on there, the size and the fonts and everything else, so we pass that on in the RFP, which we intend to send out shortly after the first of the year.
Mr. Redpath.
Several things on the logo, and actually, Mr. Bittner, I don't know what your preferred logo is, so I apologize ahead of time. I disagree with you on this. I may. I've objected to the logo for a long time, and I have a very simple objection. The first time I saw it, I thought, oh my God, because I know the Statue of Liberty faces east more or less, and it just looked like the sun was setting on Liberty. You couldn't see the face, it looked like the sun set on Liberty, and that was my first reaction to the logo, was that it portrayed Liberty in decline, and that still is my main objection to it. I also, while I have a secondary objection, I don't think we should broadcast in our logo that we're 43 years old. I don't see the point in that. And so I would be in favor of deleting the 1971, and I would be in favor of the sun rising on the Statue of Liberty. I think the Statue of Liberty is appropriate. I saw an email recently from a Mr. Hasty urging the adoption of the porcupine. I strongly object to that, although my mind is open. I do not think we should adopt the Free State Project logo as a Libertarian Party logo. I think that that people don't understand it. There was a guy from Northern Virginia who ran this year, Jeff Carson, and instead of the O, he used a porcupine there. I worked booths. I had to explain to people. People didn't understand. If you think people understand that the porcupine is a symbol of, they don't even see it as a porcupine. Is that a hedgehog? What is that? All right. I mean, there would be a tremendous educational process involved. And then what does it say? What does it say? We're prickly. Okay. So, do you advertise it? I mean, so I guess believe it or not, my mind is open. I mean, but it may not be that way. I strongly support the idea of the Statue of Liberty. Everybody knows it. And it has gravitas. The Statue of Liberty has gravitas. It was mentioned that, oh, the donkey was pinned on, pun intended, the donkey was pinned on the Democratic Party because somebody called Andrew Jackson a jackass, okay? And the elephant, I mean, no, I think the logo needs some tweaks. We need to see your face. The sun shouldn't set on Liberty, but I do think the Statue of Liberty is an appropriate symbol for our party.
Mr. Vora, then I have Dr. Lark, Mr. Tomaso, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. McClendon. Mr. Vora.
Right now, as things stand right now, we already have 2 excellent logo options available to us right this second. Or is it more than 2?
Yeah, all the ones from the Design for Liberty.
Oh, okay. Of the ones in Design for Liberty, I would say that there's one that's my favorite in Design for Liberty, and there's plenty of people in Design for Liberty who disagree with my choice. So maybe we have 10 excellent logos. But the point is, at this very moment, we already have several in Design for Liberty. We have one from, can you remind me of the gentleman from Georgia, the graphic designer?
Mr. Taylor, Will Taylor.
Will Taylor. Will Taylor's also submitted an excellent logo, which would also, I think at this point, the challenge we have is basically, we're guaranteed that we already have at least somewhere between 3 and 10 good logos. We can get more. The primary reason that I suggested 99 Designs is because we already have some that we need to choose from, and 99 Designs gives us a mechanism for choosing. as well as leaves the option open to people that just didn't know that this process was going on. I mean, I don't want people in our party to feel like they were shut out and not given an option. Some of the world's, best graphic designers are libertarians, and would be, for many of them, it would be an honor to be part of it. Some of the world's best designers are Democrats and Republicans, and for them, it would be a huge selling point for people to know that their firm designed an extremely successful logo. The bar right now is set high. It's not this bar is as low as it gets, but the bar right now is already set high. We can, I'm not sure why this process needs to take 6 months. We could do it right now with what we have. I think we should open it up only, not because we're lacking anything right now. I think we should open up just for the sake of fairness and transparency and nothing else. If our goal is to get a logo, I would say we just do it today. We could just probably, by a vote of the LNC, pick between the logos we have to be done. But for transparency, I'd say let's allow other people who wish to submit something to submit something.
Dr. Larkin?
Yes, well, first of all, I'll note that the opportunity for humor in this discussion is substantial.
Could you speak up, please?
Second that.
Mr. Redpath, you're allocated at least one joke. Again, what do we need to come out of here with? Are we going to make a decision as to a process for this? What are we coming up with? Because we can discuss what we like or don't like for quite a long time.
I have some thoughts on that. What would probably be helpful is for somebody to propose a motion that has a timeline for a search process and an agenda item of fixed length on the next LNC meeting to select from the logos, and potentially some flexibility in the process so that the executive director could send out a poll or some sort of, basically let the party know that this is a process, and if they would want to have input, have a mechanism for that. If it's the 99 Designs thing, then that's what it is. But I mean, I think a motion to resolve that we would pick a logo at the next LNC meeting and describe some process for it, and potentially have a working committee of some LNC members as champions to coordinate that process, that would probably be a helpful motion. Mr. Tommaso?
Yeah, I support this idea. I mean, ironically, even if we don't pick a new logo, this is a very good process. There's a concept called the collision of creativity. So, trust me, and I've seen this, the Free State Project was mentioned, I see all these kind of crowdsourcing ideas come up all the time, and you have one designer going, oh, I can do better than that. And the competition, trust me, we're going to see ideas that are going to spark other ideas. Someone's going to come up with an idea and like, oh wait, I could do a project around that and run with it. So even if we only pick something that some people think is marginally better, the dividends from this project are going to be massive. We're going to come up with something we haven't even thought of before, and we may come up with something that's even cooler than the Obama O. I mean, we could be that next, quantum leap in design. So I highly encourage to get this process moving forward. We're going to get multiple dividends out of this, no doubt about it.
Mr. Johnson, then Mr. McClendon, then Mr. Benedict.
I'm all for us looking at logos and all the options and making a decision. I do want to just put in my 2 cents about going back to the logo we had before this one, which was, I think, some clip art, but we used it over and over again. It was just the Statue of Liberty, didn't have a year on it, didn't have words. You could put Libertarian Party next to it, or use State Party. We used that when we go back to old literature and so forth. That one worked.
LP Illinois still uses that one. Mr. McClendon?
Yeah, I'd like to point out that this is a significant budget issue, not only for the national committee, but also state affiliates. As Robert was pointing out, like 90% of the states base their state logo upon the national logo. Texas comes to mind. And so when we start changing that logo at the national level, that propagates to states. Tremendous cost involved here. And also, I think Robert said this idea was posted on the state chairs list, and there was a lot of concern about this cost to the state affiliates in that context.
Mr. Benedict, then Mr. Hagan, and Mr. Olson, and I'll come back to Mr. Benedict.
It would be okay with me just this concept, if a committee was formed with Arvin Vora and Brett Bittner, that's it, and they were told, try and make some proposals before January 31st. And you know, if they need $1,000 budget, that can come out of our branding budget. Just those two, go through your process, decide your process, get it done. We want to adopt it without the LNC voting to adopt it, but get those options. You can brainstorm this for 10 more years. Get something done, because I'd like to move forward with whatever the new logo is.
Mr. Hagan, Mr. Olson, Mr. Bittner, and then back to Dr. Lund. Mr. Hagan.
Well, first, just wanted a quick thing on the age of the logo, being 10 years old. It didn't tell me that we should get a new one, because like BMW has an ancient logo and it's a good logo, so just age to make things. But I was going to add on to what Guy brought up. I'd like to include in the process survey of the state chairs and see which state parties use our current logo as part of their company for their logo, and the ones that do, if they have objections to us changing it, or what kind of cost impact they think will be to the states.
Mr. Olson.
I just like to ask, does anybody here have the knowledge or expertise to comment on copyright trademark issues related to the logo?
A new logo would be a new thing.
The current one or the future one?
Well, the new one. If we come up with a new logo, like the Statue of Liberty, you can't trademark or anything like that. Anybody can use it. But if we came up with something just new and distinctive, we could perhaps trademark it or whatever. I don't know what's involved in that. I'd just like to bring that topic up and see if anybody has any information on it.
We would file a trademark application for the new logo that we would have exclusive use of it. It would probably be granted because it's a new logo, so there's no one else who has prior use. Mr. Bittner, Dr. Lark, and then Mr. Hayes.
I wanted to reply to Mr. McClendon and Mr. Hagan with regard to the cost to affiliates. That's something that we can include as part of our process. In fact, the one that I prefer is one that has already taken that into account and has made it so that it is very easily changed, very easily adapted for each individual state. And that was actually one of the biggest appeals for me.
Dr. Lark.
Just to ask a simple-minded question. To whom are we trying to appeal with our logo? Is it us? Is it the people? I mean, do we want to make ourselves? I assume the purpose of the logo is to identify yourself to anyone quickly, hopefully in a positive fashion. So, whom are you going to be surveying? Are you going to be surveying just LP members? Are you going to try to get surveys of non-LP members? I would hope that you would, if you're going to look at this, you're going to survey more than just people who are already with us, who are actually pay their dues.
To respond, I think that that's actually more important than what people outside our bubble think. In terms of attractiveness, in terms of outreach, because we can spend all day fighting about porcupine or penguin or lion or whatever animal we want to put together, or colors, but at the end of the day, it's only what appeals to us already.
And how long would it take you roughly to do what you would think is, I mean, I know a little something about statistics, I'm not a survey person. I mean, to actually get some useful information, how long do you think it would take?
I'm not sure.
Mr. Hayes.
One thing, I would have to agree with Mr. Baum's points about, deleting the date and deleting the date. At the airport, he was just B and asterisk. But anyway, deleting the date and putting sun on the face, because I've kind of put a little very unscientific poll up in a group I have, and a lot of people said they liked it. The biggest complaint about that was, show her face. Another concern with doing this sort of crowdsourcing of the design relative to copyright, will we have some sort of agreement that if somebody submitted, we have the use of it? Okay. So that was my concern.
I've got a motion.
Yeah, Mr. Goldsmith.
I've got a motion to submit to the committee. I move that the chair appoint a committee of 3 LNC members or alternates to solicit new logo designs for the Libertarian Party and report back to the LNC with a selection of designs no later than March 1st, 2015. I lost a year.
Is there a second for that motion? Do I have a second? Is there an objection to this motion?
I would like to change the word selection to recommend, or recommendation.
I forget how I worded it already. To solicit. I just solicit logo designs. There's an S on the end of that word.
Yes. Solicit new logo designs.
They're not gonna pick it, they're gonna recommend.
Solicit logo designs and report back to the LNC no later than March 1st, 2015.
There's a second. Is there a need for discussion on this motion?
I didn't say adopt the logo.
I hear no.
I'm just thinking mechanically over here. If we use something like 99 designs, there's a window in which we can pay for one of the logos. And so it's not like a 3-month window, it's maybe like a couple of weeks. So with that in mind, it's tricky. It might be something that might be more effectively done as a mail ballot, or that we just submit to 99 designs just right before the LNC meeting. Is another way to do that.
Mr. Tomaso.
For the night, isn't there a process of where you can sort of like a round 1, round 2? So if we can maybe stage that so we're in whatever round 2 or 3 around the time of the LNC meeting, so we actually could present a final juried 2, 3, 4 designs for us to pick. That might just sort of time the start of the process. If we want to do the LNC meeting, we're probably talking a January or February official start the clock.
Time's expired. We'll move to a vote.
The motion is that the chair appoint a committee of 3 LNC members or alternates to solicit new logo designs and report back to the LNC no later than March 1st, 2015.
Can't be earlier. Is this substantive? It's a motion. All right. Ms. Mattson, or I'll wait for you to get your vote set.
Is there objection?
I could ask, is there objection? Oh, there's not. Oh, that's so much faster. Thank you, Dr. Roberts.
Thanks, Coach.
The next item is mine regarding renewing FEC litigation. I've discussed this on the email list some, so I think you guys have the background. There is a new update from Mr. Gura. Apparently the way the last round of this FEC bequest litigation went, no one was deemed to have won, even though the FEC said they won. And so there was this cost shifting question, and we were owed by the FEC, I want to say, I got the exact number, they owed us $152. But then, in a judicious use of taxpayer funds, the FEC decided that they would send a bunch of lawyers to fully brief and re-tax costs, requiring our lawyer to go back and argue against it, although I don't know if he's necessarily an abilis for it. But the new re-taxed costs, we now owe the FEC $620.40, which I'm sure that contribution from the LNC to the government coffers is well worth all of those lawyers' time that was spent on it, which is just sort of the insult to injury that makes me want to sue the hell out of them even more. So basically, Dr. Art.
Well, I don't know if we want to poke the FEC. Well, we do want to poke the FEC in the eye. This is going on. I suspect Chris Salisa of the Washington Post would be very interested in this.
He might be, and Mr. Benedict, can you make sure that he hears about it? I think
there'll be a lot of people.
You were copied on the email from Alan.
Okay.
So, the big picture background. Right now, the FEC annual contribution limits apply to bequests. So if you die and leave the Libertarian Party $1 million, we get that dripped and dragged out $32,400 per year until it eventually gets in, and with inflation adjustments and whatnot. There are some FEC rules that have come out that might let us move it into a couple different buckets, but the annual contribution limits on bequests still exist. We have fought this battle before in the DC Circuit. In their infinite wisdom, they had decided that the idea that someone would leave the LNC money that exceeded the annual contribution limits was just such a ridiculous thing that it was very unlikely that it would ever repeat itself, and so there really wasn't a justiciable question because we had already gotten out of trust all the money by the time that it got to court. Lo and behold, a donor has very generously left us a bequest that will probably total out somewhere over north of $200,000 and above the annual contribution limits. It repeated itself. New. Our attorney who handled that litigation is relatively famous in legal circles, Alan Gora. He's the lead counsel in the DC gun case that restored Second Amendment rights to the nation's capital, and then I think subsequently the Chicago case that restored them to the rest of the country, has taken on this litigation. There's a fully developed record from the previous round that would only need to be supplemented very briefly. Just, hey, we're back here with new facts now, but all the same things that we showed you apply still. The total cost is, he told me he'd do it for $5 grand a year while the case is active, plus actual, costs and expenses. So I would estimate, ballpark, that should we decide to move forward on this, we should expect about $7,500 per year while the case is going, and that's all in until it's finalized. The case I doubt would last more than 2 years on the outside because the record's already developed. We don't have all the discovery process unless the FEC gets squirrely. But I think the FEC, from my understanding from Mr. Gura, they agree with us on the record. Like, we're not arguing over what the facts of the matter are. We're arguing over whether or not it's okay to, restrict dead people's money and whether that's constitutional. We anticipate that we will receive the first payment from the bequest in this coming calendar year, and so that would cover the additional expense of the litigation, plus we'd actually get some money into the budget as real revenue. So I would move that we authorize Mr. Gura to basically do LNC versus FEC round 2.
Second.
Second for Mr. Redpath. Mr. Goldstein.
I've got 2 points. The first of which is, would this point be mooted if the Congress and President Obama signed what I've heard was pending legislation to increase that limit to $800,000 per individual per year?
We would be mooted and we would probably get digged out of that.
My second point is, we're going to get this money anyway. Is it worth it to this body to spend over $15,000 ballpark over the next 2 years to get immediate access to money we're eventually going to get anyway?
That's a question for the body, Mr. Redpath.
If somebody leaves us $10 million.
Pardon?
What if somebody leaves us $10 million? I mean, it would be theoretically possible that somebody could leave us an amount of money whereby the interest every year would exceed the FEC. I mean, it's possible. So, I mean, the fact that we could all of a sudden someday be blessed with an 8-digit figure would be possible, I think is worth fighting for.
Dr. Larkin.
Yes, I was handed a piece of paper that has a question. I think I'll just read the question. Given the act by Congress over the weekend, are we able to use that money now is underlined, to pay down the mortgage? Question mark. Is this issue possibly now moot?
From my discussion with Mr. Gura, we can make choices about what we would like to use the money for that would maintain the liveliness of the controversy. Basically, we just tell the FEC we didn't want it for the building or the legal fund. We wanted it for the general fund. Now, back to the question of whether or not we can have our money. So it presents a different option for us, but we could still have a live controversy. The 800,000 is the thing that I think would ding us. Mr. Olson, were you seeking to be recognized first, or Mr. Wiener? Mr. Olson, were you seeking to be recognized? Mr. Wiener, and then Mr. McLeod.
If at some point, if we did not pursue this right now, and if at some point in the future we got another large bequest, say $10 million, would we be able to reinstate the case then?
You can always bring, well, as it's a First Amendment claim, you don't get the same sort of latches problem that you would if it was a different claim, so they can't, if we had a different justiciable controversy with a different bequest, it could be done then, yes. I believe the answer to your question is yes. Mr. Redpath and then Ms. Matson, were you seeking to be recognized?
Jim asked.
Oh, sorry, I had Mr. McClendon first.
Yeah, I just want to briefly mention, it appears there's the possibility that the existence of that 32,000 and change rule would actually be a disincentive for a multimillionaire to give us the 10 million, because if he knows that we're only going to get it piecemeal, he'll say, well, no point in doing it. That's true.
And Mr. Redpath and Mr. Hayes.
Addressing Mr. Wiener's point, who's to say that Alan Gurrow or anybody else is going to be willing to do it for $5,000 a year if we do delay it?
It is cheap, Mr. Gurrow, just so everyone's clear that we're getting a fellow traveler discount. Mr. Hayes.
Normally, my inclination would be to say, you know, hey, we're going to get the money eventually for amounts like that, but there could be a larger sum come up. But you know, we have immediate needs now. You know, we can reinvest that into our brand and our affiliates and everything we're doing. So I think getting that money and the chance that we could get another bequest and having that money available, you know, we need it now.
Mr. Tommaso.
I noticed the budget we just passed, if I'm reading the top sheet correctly, only budgeted $6,000 for litigation. So this would eat that up. Is Mr. Gurrow willing to delay his, I guess it's a retainer fee until the bequest comes in?
Haven't asked yet. I figure we can fix the budgeting part of it if we authorize it.
Okay.
Because just as a point of information, neither the cost of this litigation nor the anticipated 32.4 that's coming in are in the budget we passed. So we have credit and debit mystery numbers. Dr. Lieberman.
Request for information?
Yes.
Okay. Is it really true that no one has ever donated over the maximum legal amount to the Democrats or the Republicans in the form of bequests before?
I don't think that is true. I don't think that was a claim I made, but I don't think it's true. I think people have donated to political parties. However, I don't think it's as common because don't they tend to have other committees that they can use? They have other vehicles that we don't have. And so large donors to the old parties tend to have more estate planning options, whereas our large donors get kind of stuck with us.
Thanks.
Is there any further debate on this question? Hearing none, we'll move to a roll call vote. And just as I recall, motion is to authorize the litigation and the expenditure of up to $7,500 per year during the pendency of it. I mean, what did you have?
What I got down from what the original said was move that the LNC authorize Alan Gurrow to continue
It's technically reopening litigation on the subject.
Okay. Reopen litigation on the subject.
I have one point of information before we move to the vote. What did we spend on FEC1? Ballpark number. What did we spend on FEC1?
Previous litigation.
Is it on the order of 30 grand?
Hold on. Versus.
Yes. Does anyone have any objection to having the motion include the amendment to the budget at the same time? To increase the litigation line item by 7,500? It's just cleaner.
It would be, litigation proactive, just to verify, line 75, whatever that ends up in.
And that would address Mr. Tomaso's question. Does anyone have any problem doing it as a whole? If there's no objection to that procedure, are you ready for those? All right. We'll proceed with the roll. Ms. Mattson?
Aye.
Mr. Olson?
Nay.
Ms. Kirkland?
Pass.
Mr. Tomaso?
Pass.
Mr. Goldsby?
Aye.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Dr. Ward?
Aye.
Mr. Bittner?
Aye.
Mr. McClendon?
Aye.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Hagan?
Yes.
Mr. Redpath?
Yes.
Mr. Gore?
Yes.
Ms. Kirkland?
Yes.
And Mr. Tomaso?
Yes.
I will vote yes.
It counts 14 to 1.
13 and a half for this reduced.
We'll next move to new business with, to amending policy manual section 2.02, affiliate support committee regarding the date of the report. I believe that's Mr. Tomaso's motion.
Yes. I move the motion.
Is there a second?
Where's
Mr. Tomaso's motion?
Second.
Or a second?
Oh.
Mr. Tomaso, do you feel a need to speak to the motion?
I certainly hope not. If anyone has any questions, for way reasoning, I'll answer them, but I think it stands on its own merits.
Does anyone want to be recognized to speak about this motion?
Point of information, regarding, if I may, the shall deliver a report to the LNC for the last LNC meeting that they could deliver at the morning of the meeting. Or they could even deliver it during the meeting.
Wow.
It's the report. So it'll be,
So it better be 7 days prior. Because it's a binder. Or I get cranky. Is there any objection to moving the question? Well, let me ask, is there any objection to this motion? Hearing none, it's passive without objection. We'll next move to adoption of the electronic meeting rules.
Just a second, catch my notes up before I forget that question.
Be at ease for a moment.
Let me know when you're ready.
So I'm going to copy the wording of the motion we just adopted. Okay, in the meantime, if somebody could pass around these two documents, that would be helpful. There's two documents, so each person should get 2 sheets. Oh, and I guess I need a copy too. You can give me the end, it's fine.
We do one on the, this one's got 2, 3.
it's 2 separate sheets.
This one is got 2.
Oh, it's not printed duplex? Okay, so yeah, I guess there's two documents, each requiring 2 sheets, so you should get 4 pieces of paper.
Front and back.
Oh, it is duplex?
Yeah. The second one's duplex.
Okay, all right, if it's duplex.
It has been brought to my attention that there was already $6,000 in the budget for the lawsuit, so it should not have been.
No, that's not what Nick said. He said this was in addition to.
Yeah, it did. This is new litigation.
Oh, this is new litigation?
No,
But he said this was he specifically said this is in addition to the $6,000 already in the budget.
Okay, that's fine.
It still says electronic meetings. I don't see any highlights.
These are the same.
Oh, each is to resolve. Let me makes sense for observers. Where's the rule to requiring promulgation of this committee?
I don't know.
Okay, so the two documents that you have tell you. No, they don't.
No, they
Okay.
don't.
I had, something happened to the formatting when this document was printed. I had the insert and strike out to highlight for you the things that were changed since the version you got yesterday. So that somehow did not show up on the printout. Fun. Okay. Well, I'll tell you the subject matter for the things that were changed, and I can walk you through where those changes appeared in. It's a slightly different approach here. All right, so you do at least see at the top of this document, there's an issues to resolve. All right, so there are 3 items there that were brought up yesterday that prompted the changes that are reflected on the second document, which is amended. Okay, so the first was add a rule requiring promulgation of rules to committees, because we want these rules to apply to the committees. We got to make sure that they know about it, and as new people get appointed, they need to know what rules they're operating under. So new item O has been added. If you look on the second document, that does have all the underlined, the as amended, pretty title up front. It says updated. The as amended new item O says the LNC secretary shall promulgate these rules to all members and alternates of each committee upon notice of their election or appointment. And it was phrased so that if they don't tell me that they've been appointed, say it's a state appointment to the platform committee and I haven't been told about it, I can't possibly send it out. So when I'm notified of their selection, it's the only time that I can possibly do that. But I will be making endeavors to find out who they are, even if they don't want to tell me. I will dig it out of them. So that has been added. The second issue to resolve at the top of the other page is change terminology to address bylaws language of both teleconferences and video conferences. So what was done to address that is you'll see at the items A and B in the updated version. Item B was there before, but we moved all the definitions up top. So, but the first one is new. The term electronic meeting, which by the way is the language that Roberts refers to these things as, the term within these electronic meeting rules shall be construed to include teleconferences and video conferences, because those are the words used in the bylaws. The bylaws authorize committees to use teleconferences and video conferences. So basically you have 3 terms that could appear in here. Electronic meetings means both. If it says just video conference, then it applies only to Adobe Connect format. And I don't think we have any rules in here that are only for teleconference. So throughout the document then, you'll notice like in C, it's been clarified to say video conferences will be conducted with Adobe Connect, where before that said electronic meetings will be conducted that way. And so that just wording change has been adjusted. Since you can't see the changes, let me grab my other document and I'll tell you where else those changes appear for that. A little crippled here since the track changes didn't show up on the printout. Okay, so you'll also see that item. Okay, so item N now says video conferences where it previously said meetings. And the new language that was added to I has the word video conference, but that language is new, and so it didn't have anything before. And there's nothing, like I said, nothing in here that's teleconference only, but there are some things that can only apply to the video conference. The third item that was changed, video conference observers should put ZZ in front of their names to segregate the participant list. So that is added to the end of I, the second sentence. Video conference participants other than members or alternates of the committee must precede their sign-in name with ZZ so as to group them at the end, I can't read, of the alphabetical participant list. that gives us visual segregation between people who can vote and people who can't. And that's going to be easier for whoever is chairing the meeting and counting the votes. You got a visual separation between those people. You kind of have an at the table group and a not at the table, although you could have alternates mixed in. But if you get hands being raised from the bottom of the list, you got a problem.
Are you moving this?
So I guess this is the appropriate time on behalf of the committee to move this as our main motion.
Second, is there a second?
Second.
Is there a need for discussion?
I believe Mr. Johnson has an issue he wants to address.
I have a minor issue, but Dan, I don't know. On 10, I want to change participants other than members or alternates of the committee to non-participants. The reason is that we're telling people to turn their camera off and their microphones muted. And I think a participant could be the executive director or legal counsel or something. And so I agree with the intent of this. I just wanted to change the wording. But it's not, as Dan is pointing out, it's may. It's not a rule.
I think it's a little nebulous there, and we tried several different versions of the wording, but I think it's adequate as it is. And if we run into problems, we can go back and change policy manual, but I think for a first cut, this is probably good enough.
I want to kind of figure out where we're at. Is there an objection from the other committee members to adopting Mr. Johnson's suggestion into the motions that you have moved? Is there objection to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just leave it
So are you
as
moving it as an amendment, or are you just saying it?
I'm just saying it.
Okay.
But I'll argue that.
I believe Dr. Lieberman wanted to be recognized from the gallery, is that right? With the indulgence of the body, Dr. Lieberman?
One minor, almost minor change, suggested change. Under 7E, you have the last sentence. These time limits do not apply to the LNC Executive Committee, the LNC Advertising Publication Review Committee, and it shouldn't compete nor the individual.
It's probably more instead of in.
Does anybody object to changing it to or there?
I didn't hear any objections to that. Mr. Tomaso?
Does that comment have to be there?
Yeah, if you want to copy edit this, there's a few things we can.
Order.
I don't believe
Go ahead.
the comments.
Dr. Lieberman, continue.
This is under 7I. I noticed that you have using CZ for whatever you're going to call them. Would it be helpful to have a special designation for alternates as compared to just non-participants? So that they're otherwise the alternates get mixed in with all the non-participants.
Actually discussed that with somebody last night about maybe if the people who are neither members or alternates use ZZ, you could use like ZY and have a group of the alternates, so you'd have full members up top, you'd have a little section in the middle that has alternates, and then you have people that will never ever, in any circumstance, be entitled to vote. We thought about that. I don't know, there are times though that the alternates do get to vote, and so I don't know how, it can be done.
Whatever it is.
But I don't know if
I don't
it's
think that's a
necessary. We
big
may just
deal.
try it and see how it goes.
Mr. Tomaso?
There was a question, I don't know if, the parliamentarian can probably answer this. There was a question I had yesterday about, rules about quorum and vote totals or requirements and such. Do we want to, would it be a good idea to note these in this thing that about what rules apply for these meetings in that respect? And when there was some discussion about, maintaining quorum, what the raw number counts are for like 2/3 versus half versus majority. Do you want to put a note in here clarifying what set of rules from Roberts apply to these meetings?
We discussed those subjects and decided just to leave it where Roberts, the Roberts defaults cover this. It's not necessary to restate them. There's a lot of other procedural issues out of Roberts that are going to apply to these committees that they're going to have to deal with, and we decided there's no we don't need to restate it here because Roberts still applies because the bylaws still adopt Roberts for our entire organization. So they're still under the quorum requirements of a majority for committees, which is.
And I'm trying to find the line about special meetings. Was that only to the LNC, or does that apply for every committee? Is it considered a special meeting?
I do not believe that applies only to the LNC. It is item L. It applies to all committees.
Or special meetings?
Mr. Goldstein.
I've got a procedural question to the committee. Once these rules are in force, what mechanism do you guys foresee for all the various committees to get dibs on using the system at certain times and dates? Is there going to be a sign-up sheet on the website? Somebody in the office going to keep track of when the stuff is going to be used? Because I think if I remember from our discussion, it could only be used by one group of people at a time. So what implementation procedures do you guys foresee, if any?
Yeah, that is true. It can only be used by one group at a time. If you look at the spreadsheet that came with our report, you'll notice the pricing is, X dollars per month per host. A host is a person that has a login and a password and can run a meeting. And if you need two of those simultaneously, we could pay for two hosts and double our annual costs on it if we have a need to simultaneous meetings. But what I imagine instead is we have one host. We're going to create one login that staff controls and basically just schedule the staff who's going to use it when.
Time has expired on this item. We'll move to a vote. Is there an objection to adopting these rules as proposed by the committee? And hearing no objection, they are adopted. The next item on the agenda is Ms. Matson's item regarding a convention issue. As soon as Ms. Matson's ready.
Okay, so this subject is something I think is important for the LNC to know about and may need to make a decision on what to do with it. When I was assembling the archive of convention materials, I noticed what appears to me to be a violation that we have in place. And so let me get you directed to the policy in question. It's going to be on page 29 of your policy manual, which is section 2.03.4. We'll be taking a look at here. I'll give you just a second to get that. And so what this policy says is the party shall not directly or indirectly compensate or otherwise underwrite or subsidize the convention travel, lodging, excepting room upgrades, which the party received at no cost, and various other costs of any convention delegates. And so what I noticed was it appears that the party's bill included a $699.15 charge for the room of Jeff Neal, our previous chair. And I checked the delegate list and confirmed that both Jeff and Nancy were convention delegates at the Columbus Convention. So here we have a condition of convention delegates whose convention lodging, which was not a room upgrade that the party received at no cost, appears to be on the bill of the National Party.
Point of information. At the bottom of that paragraph, it indicates that all volunteer compensation must be approved by the Convention Oversight Committee. Was there anything in the pre-convention planning in which it was all noted that Ms. Neal and Mr. Neal would have a room as part of Ms. Neal's planning of the convention?
No. A room upgrade was approved for Nancy as the chair of the convention committee, but no gratis rooms were approved.
Okay. Thank you.
My initial inquiry to this was some people thought that maybe during the last term, during a meeting, maybe Jeff had brought it up and mentioned that he was going to use a comp room and nobody objected, so they thought it was okay. But that did not match my recollection of those discussions. So just to confirm, I went back and got the audio of the last two meetings where these subjects, well, it was definitely discussed at the March meeting. It just didn't come up at all, that question at the next meeting. But a little three-minute segment of audio that I do have available if anyone wants to hear it, but it was very clearly noted. I'll tell you the situation at the time, the context for the discussion. This policy was not, at that time, identical to what you see here. At the time, it did not have the parenthetical phrase, accepting room upgrades, etc. And it also didn't have the last two sentences. So at the time, the chair and Dan Wiener had drafted a motion to insert the parenthetical that you see, although it was amended slightly on site and the last two sentences. So at the time, there were kind of three subjects pending. So there was the existing policy, which was, no room upgrades could be used at all by a delegate, and a proposal to allow that, and there was an amendment to instead use room upgrades as rewards for large donors. So there were kind of three subjects on the table at once, but the discussion that I got off the audio was very clearly just saying that the convention planners were going to have to pay for their own rooms, and he wanted the policy changed to allow them to at least use a free upgrade. That was very clearly the language that was discussed. And so since this is on the bill, it appears to me that this is a problem and a policy that he clearly knew about because it was discussed in that meeting right before convention. Yesterday I found some new information, and I'll let Tim correct me if I'm portraying this incorrectly, but I think what I heard him tell me was he talked to Jeff Neal to ask him about it, and what I think I heard him say was after the convention, Jeff had gone to the hotel and complained about some various ways that the hotel had kind of jacked us around, I think was his terminology. For instance, we were supposed to be able to use one room for our meals, and then they told us, no, that room's not available, and so we had to pay extra costs then to break down the main hall, set up the banquet, and then break that down and set it back to the next day. So we incurred some extra costs. And it turns out the other room actually wasn't used by anybody else at all. So then the hotel said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll just comp the room. And so it seems to me if that's how it went.
Lisa, thank you. So when it's checking out, I mean, to put out credit card, expecting for it's expecting just an upgrade. And it's charged Ben Stillson's discretion to get to the airport, catch his flight in that day. With all the other things that the hotel had messed up, even though if they were comping the living room or they messed up something.
Okay, so you're not, okay, so he doesn't necessarily know that the room was comped because of complaint?
Right.
Okay, all right, so not certain about that aspect of it, but.
Is there a motion?
I have not made a motion. I wanted the LNC's direction on how to deal with it. Tim has had some conversations with Jeff, and maybe we should let him explain what's being proposed.
I want to recognize Mr. Kraus for a moment. He has, I think, is it information or?
Yeah, related to what Tim was saying, it was my understanding as well that I am aware that Jeff did give a personal credit card to the hotel so that he would be paying the normal rate. I was aware when we were billed, it was partly my fault for not noticing that we were billed for his room, and then we got a separate credit, a combined credit for all the free rooms that we were owed and all the various credits that we were owed in the rebates. And if I had noted that at the time, I should have contacted the hotel, had them refill Jeff Neal's room at zero cost, and not added that to the credit. So I really blame myself for failing to notice this out, 70, 80, 90 pages of bills. If I had noticed this, it would have been taken care of, and this never would have come up as an issue for the room that he was credited for. So I blame myself. I don't blame Jeff. Nancy and Jeff did put up a personal credit card, and their intent was that card would charge for both his incidentals and his regular room rate, and he was only apparently charged for the incidentals, which never actually showed on our bill. They actually only billed us separately for his room, but then we got this big credit for all the free rooms that we were owed and all the different adjustments that we were owed. So I blame myself for this, for not noticing this sooner so that I could have the bill taken care of properly.
Mr. Hagan, then Mr. Tomasi.
Yeah, and I also went and talked to Jeff, so yeah, he is a monthly donor, so we need to take some donations he's already done this year, apply it to the room, and I wish has objection to that. Talk about, or they can essentially stop this monthly donation, take the money we're taking out each month, anyway, apply it to the room until that's paid off for the room rate, the basic room rate, and then continue his monthly donation after that.
Mr. Tomaso, then Mr. Johnson, then Ms. Mattson.
My question is for what Robert just told us. So on the credits you got back from the hotel, you can identify the specific credit for their room?
No, it's a month credit, it's all combined and I have no breakdown.
So you added up all the room credits and it didn't add up to what you guys gave out? It obviously included their room?
Well, there's other credits in there. There was, like they double charged my room at one point for at least a day, so that was supposedly credited back. There were other miscellaneous charges, so it's not a simple matter of saying, okay, we got X amount of credit and this is how it breaks down, because there was some back and forth process to get that credit number.
But we know one of the other credit cards were not charged for that room. We know that?
Right.
Okay.
Mr. Johnson.
Did we pay $699 or not? It sounds to me like we got credited for it, and so it cost us $0. Is that right?
Yeah, essentially we didn't pay for that room.
So what are we
It's my understanding.
That's your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Mattson.
So I guess I've got several points to address here. I want to address the reason I brought this to you because I do have very strong objections to the proposal to handle this by taking his past donations and say, well, that goes towards it. You have a donor that gave us some donations with unrestricted funds, and that doesn't entitle them to later, take something of value and say, well, my past donations cover it. I just in principle there, I have a very serious objection that those were unrestricted. They were not, these are prepayments for my hotel room. Sitting in this room, we have two of our largest lifetime donors, and they didn't get free hotel rooms, even though they've given very large donations in the past. His monthly donations, it looks like they've only been processed 4 times this year for a total of $400, and that's not sufficient to cover his $699 hotel bill. And I don't want to go on a payment plan. I mean, I don't.
They gave $10,000 for the building.
Alicia, that number ended in July. That was only through the convention for theirs in terms of the financial sheet that they're looking at. So they also gave July, August, September,
I checked FEC reports and I found it on 4.
No crosstalk. No crosstalk. Ms. Mattson, continue.
I found it on 4 FEC reports, so maybe I missed something. It's possible, but I still disagree in principle with saying, oh, well, I paid for it in the past. That's just the logic there. It just sends me through the roof. Last term, when Star Child repeatedly complained that we shouldn't be having LNC snacks at the meeting, Jeff also made a very public point of saying, I'm directing staff to use my donations to that, to cover a cost of snacks at LNC meetings. So are his donations covering that? Now granted, we didn't create a restricted fund, but this is kind of public posturing of my donations cover that. So now we want to say, well, now his donations cover his hotel room too. I think we just need to have a lump sum payment of what should have been paid and move on. And so I needed to bring it to you because I think what's being proposed is not the right solution.
What's the answer to my question?
The answer to your question is the only thing the policy allows Jeff to use is a room upgrade, which the party received at no cost, but basically some sort of credit. If the room was not originally intended to be comped, but in the end it was comped, That was intended to offset additional expenses of the party, but instead it offset his personal room instead of the additional expenses that the party took on.
I'm gonna recognize Mr. Redpath now, and then I'm gonna come to Mr. McClendon, and then I can come back to you, Mr. Johnson, and have some semblance of order.
First of all, I have a point of information. Did something change because it was standard procedure, which benefited me? It was sort of a standard thing that the chair was comped a room. When did that end?
It changed sometime within the past 4 years. It was after you were chair.
Okay.
But it has in times past been a normal procedure that, some of we get perks with the deal we get from the hotel. And sometimes there's comp rooms, the free upgrades, that sort of thing. It was changed due to concerns that those were being used to benefit close associates of planners that might not have otherwise have come to the convention, but this benefit would help people come to the convention that otherwise weren't going to, and so then you have some delegates getting financial help from the party to get there. So
that was a question. Now my comment. I mean, it's all been a washout in the end. I mean, Jeff said that just pay for it, and I continue pledging, doing the monthly donation, or I will cease the monthly donation, pay you the amount, and then start it up again once that amount's paid. I mean, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, unless we are dealing with the Jeff Neal maxing out, which I don't think we are.
Okay. Mr. McClendon, and then I think Dr. Mark.
Well, I also see there's a risk of breeding ill will with Jeff Neal, and also risking that he may discontinue his donation permanently or just go into a long-term hiatus. And so rather than that, I would like to motion that we simply accept his offer to discontinue his donations until one of the two options he presented.
Well, so just to be clear, there is no motion on the floor. No one has suggested we do anything. And so
I would track that. But,
no one suggested we do anything, and I think we're within a minute.
We got that.
Okay. Dr. Lark, I'll recognize you. You were seeking to be recognized, and you had not spoken on this topic yet. But if you're not, okay. Ms. Madsen?
I'll make a motion then. I'm going to move that we request that Jeff reimburse us the $699.15 for his hotel room.
We'll take the roll.
Is there a second?
I should ask that first. Is there a second? That motion dies for lack of a second. Has time expired on this issue? Yes. The next item on the agenda is discussion of the next meeting. Mr. Redpath.
I would like to move to the next LNC meeting the weekend of April 11 and 12.
No.
Shot that one down.
That seems like that might have died for lack of a second.
All right, okay.
That was quick. It died already.
Mr. Moore has point of information.
Robert, you mentioned last time that holding meetings in DC saves us thousands of dollars. How many thousands of dollars are we talking about?
It's on the order of 3 or 4, I think.
About 3 or 4,000?
Yeah.
Okay. Then based on that, I move that our next meeting be held in Washington DC.
Can you hold off on that before I give you a point of information? Point of information, I'm having my wife, who we got a chance to meet, is having her 3rd child somewhere between the end of February and the beginning of March. And so I would prefer to be on the same side of the country as he is. Just as a preference for the next meeting.
Can you just tell her to pick a date?
I can tell her a lot of
Shall we divide the question and decide on a date that's acceptable first?
Yeah, let's
Dr. Lark, did you want to?
Just a point, actually, it's not a formal tradition, but in the past, it's certainly not unusual for an LNC meeting to be held in or near the hometown of the chair. So a meeting in Phoenix would be, frankly, would meet with mine.
All right. Are there, less formally, what dates don't work for people? Dr. Mark?
Yeah, I apologize for the gesture to my good friend, Mr. Redpath. The European Students for Liberty, their big event is in Berlin on the weekend that Mr. Redpath suggested, and I have usually been one of the main speakers there. And it's a good opportunity, not only speaking to young people, but also meeting with libertarian party types in Europe. And I'd like to be able to attend that one.
What's the following weekend?
18, 19 of April is the following weekend.
So moved. In Phoenix.
4 months.
Is that a long time?
18, 19 Phoenix.
Yeah, but before that, it's a basketball tournament, so Bill can't come.
I'm gonna cry like a little girl.
We've got, no, but
I'd pay for that. Mr. Wiener?
April 18th through 19th is probably going to be the LPC State Convention weekend.
April State Convention time, a lot of places.
Well, yeah, once we get to like April 25, 26, I'm speaking in Colorado, I think we get into May.
Does end of March,
Just March 14th?
like, well, the chairman's expecting, so I'm thinking possibly late March. Is that a problem for anybody?
Is late March?
It's like the
work?
27th.
Just not the first week, not the first weekend of the NCAA tournament.
What's
We have to set our priorities here.
March 21, 22.
What about March 14th?
No, 14th is, I'll be here.
That's baby time.
The 28th,
The 28th.
last weekend in March?
Dr.
I
Lara?
was going to, I share Mr. Redpath's enthusiasm for the NCAA men's basketball tournament. I was wondering if the first weekend of April, which would be the Final Four, would be appropriate.
That's okay, that is Easter weekend, and I believe it's Passover. Am I correct, Mr. Golds?
I don't know, I'm looking.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay,
When's the
not
first night of Passover, Robert?
Obviously not
Yes.
that weekend.
What date, do you know?
It's Friday the 3rd.
So could we do the weekend of the 28th then, between them?
I'm not gonna, well, sure. I mean, it's ultimately the committee's decision. That's the second weekend. That's not as bad as the first weekend.
Don't you have a DVD recorder, Bill? We'll buy you one. We could buy your DVD
There was
player.
bars in Phoenix.
Recorder.
We'll figure it out.
Bigger question is, are you gonna fade his bets?
Not after my experience at the casino the other night.
So it sounds like the last weekend in March is pretty workable for everybody, is that
28,
28, 29.
28, 29? No hard conflicts that I've heard from anyone? And then as far as a city?
Phoenix.
Okay. Dr. Lieberman?
So I assume if you're holding it in Phoenix, you're probably not going to be holding it in conjunction with the LSLA meeting in Vegas or Freedom Fest in Vegas, which I'm just asking.
The issue with LSLA is we don't know when LSLA is yet.
The last week of May.
What did I get?
The word
Like
I
in
got
last week.
yesterday,
Oh,
word I got yesterday, they're now looking at the last weekend of May, the weekend after Memorial Day.
and I think at that point,
That's too long.
That's too long.
yeah, we can't hold the next meeting.
I mean, well, I meant the next meeting, and then you'd be Phoenix, Las Vegas, if you're going to do that.
We'll burn that bridge when we get there. So is there any objection to March 28, 29 in Phoenix? Robert, is that okay?
Yeah, I pre-checked some hotels. Phoenix is, it's not a cheap place. But I can get a rate at a decent, probably near airport location for under 130. It won't be like this price. It's not going to be under 100. It'll be 120 to 130 for that weekend.
All right.
At a 3 to 4 star airport type location. Unless I get really lucky with a possible site that we can have a convention at, and I convince them how much we badly want to do a convention and how they have not, $75 off the room rate and work.
You work your magic. We would now move into announcements. Are there announcements? Yes, Dr. Mark.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's worth noting that tomorrow, December 15th, is known as Bill of Rights Day, and that there are, hopefully, libertarian organizations will celebrate that as a proper American holiday.
So noted.
I have one announcement.
Mr. Hagan.
We'll be doing for the LNC members that either have not ever seen who's driving or just want to, be some of the more experienced guides for some of the new people. We're going to be doing the who's driving at what location?
It's 8:45 Carondelet, the same place we had the party at.
Same place we did the party last night at
3 o'clock.
right? At 3 o'clock. So if you guys want to come out and sort of give some guidance to some of the new folks, that would certainly be much appreciated.
Free booze and food?
Not that I know of. But even more important, you're going to have free knowledge that I guess you already know. But you have the free opportunity to spread that knowledge.
Free liberty.
Some of the newer folk and help them along. And making, in a large sense, your life easier, Mr. Benedict, in the coming years as you have more training.
Mr. Hagan?
Yeah, I noticed on the sign-out sheet when people were leaving, a lot of us aren't leaving until Monday, so I don't know if you want to organize either dinner or something this afternoon or this evening.
Give it to Mr. Hagan.
End of any plans and just go.
All right. Hearing no further announcements, we'll have an opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone from the gallery who would like to address the body? Mr. Starr and then Mr. Lachine.
What?
I was just looking to see if you looked like you wanted to talk. Mr. Starr.
Just very briefly, thank you very much for all your hard work. I know you're traveling very far for this, and I appreciate the time and effort you put into this.
Thank you.
By the way, I most likely will be running for office again in 2016. I was only 900 votes short, so please don't be surprised if I talk to many of you who gave this last time as I've given again. And those of you who haven't given, I may not.
Start knocking doors now.
Absolutely.
Mr. Lachine.
Thank you. As many of you might know, I am the chairman of the LSLA. We are working on our 2015 convention plans. Right now, we're planning on having it in Las Vegas, Nevada, May 29th to 31st. Having it in conjunction with the Nevada and California state conventions, I believe. What we're really trying to do is, this is kind of Brett on Nevada's baby, but he wants to have a Libertarian political expo. It's going to be called LPEX, excuse me, it's LPEX.org. That's going to be our website. We're hoping to have vendors, several days of kind of training. Wes has offered to do a fundraising. If you looked at the affiliate support committee, our number one thing was fundraising, so hopefully we'll get some good things out of there. Brett has offered to do a session. So I'm also looking for some more presenters out there. Wes, you had also said that you would like some help calling each of the state chairs. Us on the LSA, we would like to do that anyway, so if there's anything that we can double up on the phone call, we'd be happy to help you with that. And I believe that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Lieber?
So if I'm correct, that is the weekend after Memorial Day?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other people from the gallery want to say anything? Mr. Lachine?
I forgot, in the past, the LSLA has done the boost for the national convention, and I just wanted to see if you would be doing that again, or, there's no mention of us in the policy manual, so I was just kind of looking for some direction on that.
That answer isn't there yet, but it will be once the convention oversight committee is populated, I think. So, you guys want to share? Send an email to me and we'll get it to the right people. Mr. Tomaso, did you have something?
Just a reminder, some upcoming events, for those of you who are interested, the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, which is actually bigger than the National Convention now, is going to be in Manchester the first weekend in March. Jeffrey Tucker, Sheriff Mack, and I imagine someone big in the Bitcoin world are confirmed speakers. It's a pretty good event. Dr. Locke has spoken there, Mary Ruwert, Judge Knapp. So if you're interested in coming to New England, and I can introduce you to all the members who've left your states, I'd be happy to show you around.
Seeing no other public comment, we will be adjourned at 1:10 local time.
Chairman, by the way, the appropriate phrase in Massachusetts is, we'll drive off that bridge when we come to it.
Hey,
I didn't wanna kill anybody.
They fixed most of those.
Oh, this is outside of the meeting, but I already have 2 people who have expressed interest in meeting the 3 people for the logo committee. Is there a third person who wants to be on that committee? Mr. Olson? There you go. I'll send an email to the business list. If anyone else didn't raise their hand or decides like in the car that they want to be on it, send an email. I'll probably wait. I'll give it a couple days to announce.
Did we authorize you to buy that software in that motion? Should we come back into session to do that, or are we just gonna do that?
It's in the budget.
There's a budget for it.
It's a budget, okay. When are you gonna do it, and when will we be able to have access to it as committees, any idea?
Ciao.